And we're live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'll say hello to you all in the chat there. But so just to let you know, you can do super chats if you like tonight. I know it kind of charges for that, but I mean, it supports the channel. But also, more importantly, I get to kind of pick chats out. So I'll actually try to read the non super chats as well. But actually, even I wish they would just let people give tiny donations or something, because it's easier to kind of whittle it down by a few. But anyway, hello everybody. Welcome. I want to talk tonight about Newtown McEntee. I want to talk about Helen McEntee's video from today, everything regarding immigration from the last few weeks. And I want to talk about the issue to do with Britain and Ireland via Northern Ireland. This question of, well, I'll get into a little bit. There's basically a sort of a charade happening at the moment between England and Ireland, horse trading about migrant flows, trying to get the British Tory party are effectively trying to grandstand on their own immigration issue and sort of outsource it to Ireland, and not just try to push migrants into Ireland, because that's not even really happening to a massive extent, but they're basically throwing red meat to their base, their kind of Brexit base. They're trying to make it look like they're doing something in their own country. To some extent, coming to Ireland via the UK, because so many of them are attracted to the UK being a big country, and we have a shared jurisdiction in being the north of Ireland, administrated from London, basically, let's say, but actually in Ireland. So yeah, I'll get into that a bit more in a while. There's an excellent Berkey article about it that almost just says it better than I could in a way. They have good articles often, but every now and again they have a zinger, and this was a zinger about this Tory issue. I'll get into it a bit more in a while. Just a video from Helen McEntee. There's a few videos I just want to kind of go through and watch as well. From lately, there's Helen McEntee came out with a statement today in the Dáil, just absolutely mad. What I want to say about that effectively is the tone in Ireland politically is all over the place. Like my title suggests here, a brewing rebellion. Now, of course, I mean that peacefully and legally, that aspect of the definition, obviously, right? But I would say there is a sort of a form, at least, of a brewing rebellion in Ireland at the moment. You have complete breakdown of sort of the social contract in a way. We had the Dublin riots a few months ago. We had Newtown McEntee being what it was. Of course, I'll get into that a little bit more. I've spoken about it already to Philip Dwyer and others, but it's still worth talking about. You have police pepper spraying people. You have fires, like the fire that was lit up at the site. The RG Bargy, the riot police beating people up, all of that back and forth. You've all of this going on. You have in Aughrim, in Wicklow, you have Darren McGovern, a candidate in Wexford, and accompanying a local community to, and of course people will debate the nature of this interaction, but basically putting contractors on the spot who were working on alleged migrant plantation centers, and basically, I would say persuading, other people would say forcing, or other people would say twisting an arm. You can use your own definition on the word, but either way, we'll go with a nice word. They implored the contractor guy to leave. So, we're in the territory of Northern Ireland circa, and I know it's not that extreme yet, but it's starting to feel like Northern Ireland in the previous century. It's starting to feel less like a sort of an interesting protest movement, and a state that's not paying attention, and a conflict between a people having a political issue and the state ignoring them, and there being a little bit of consternation. It's moving from consternation to we will say civil unrest and social breakdown, I would say, and political breakdown. Whatever your view on that, whether that's good or bad, or whether you're pro or anti-immigration, that's the temperature in the country at the moment, and it's very chaotic. 80% of people believe there's too much immigration in Ireland right now, etc., etc. Right? You know the spiel on that. But while this is happening, you have people like Helen McEntee, who's I'm losing track over which one is which, even minister-wise. I kind of don't care. Broderick O'Gorman's the integration one, so she's the justice. Yeah, I think. So over the guards and all that. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I probably should know that, but they come and go and swap places so often, you know. But yeah, she's people like her and others, Micheál Martin, who's the Taoiseach now, Simon Harris, all of them are coming out with this kind of wishy-washy stuff, and they keep saying the same thing over and over again, which is basically immigration is great. Everyone who criticizes it is a far-right racist / terrorist, almost. Some people have been saying that it's inherently terroristic in nature to oppose mass immigration on the street or just in general. I mean, some might say I'm kind of overloading the inference there, but I think it's fair to say that it's common parlance among the political class now in Ireland to say that you might not be a terrorist if you're against immigration. Maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but that it's a terroristic position to hold, and that you are involved in a terroristic movement by extension in some way, just to be against immigration, which 80% of people in Ireland are against it. And I know that's the ones who are polled. And I've said this before, but that's those who are polled. There might be the shy respondent, for one, who might not want to say it. There might be the fact that a certain proportion of the country are profiting from it as Gombeans, a certain proportion work for immigration NGOs, and a certain amount are foreigners who want to secure family reunification. So if you factor all that in, it's effectively everyone. So you have a position where everyone is against immigration, and yet the political class are talking about that position as if on the extreme fringe, or like on one end, they're saying that it's borderline terroristic to hold that position. And on the milder end, if you want to be conservative, they're saying that it's a fringe belief that is based in hate or lack of education. And the truth is that immigration is great for everyone, and anybody who doesn't realize that is either deluded, evil, or stupid in some fashion, or manipulated, and that these people just don't realize it. Now, how can you have in the so-called liberal democracy a government speaking about an issue like that everybody holds the opposite stance on? As I've said, virtually everybody. And not just they hold that stance, but they hold that stance increasingly more radically, increasingly more dug in. And it's not just a fickle poll result. It's like this is the issue for everyone now, increasingly more and more, especially as these things like Newtown and Mount Kennedy happen. Now, the other thing on that too, in terms of the polling, is that that's the polling in spite of a relentless propaganda machine in favor of immigration. Think about all the RTE, all the newspapers, all the HR at work, all the diversity training, all of this. Think about the opposite of the propaganda or the brainwashing. Call that the carrot. Think about the stick aspect, where you can't even now when most of the country are against it, in polite society, if you're in common company, if you're like not at the pub with a couple of close friends, you're kind of not meant to talk about it. You know, you can talk about the weather, you can talk about the recycling machines for bottles, you can talk about the motor tax, you can talk about you can talk about everything. But if you bring that up, even where it's relevant, even if people are talking about, the cost of housing is crazy, you can't get a GP, you can't get into a hospital. If you say, yeah, that's crazy, I suppose, you know, bringing in like 250,000 people every year probably is kind of helping to make that situation bad. Someone, even if they agree with you, but they don't feel secure, they might their eyes might dart around and flicker and go, this is a dangerous, like forbidden, verboten topic, and people can get a bit sheepish and shy sometimes. So you have effectively a taboo on this whole thing, and then you have relentless propaganda, and you still get those polling results. So my belief is that even though the polling suggests basically merely, we'll say, that everyone is against immigration, if you would actually pull away all that noise, what you would see is that I think not only is everyone against it, like, I'm generally against immigration, I think it should be slightly less or something, but I'd say if you were to give people a truth pill, allow them to say what they feel, it would be everyone in favor of much more radical stuff. If you said, what if we introduce draconian policy to clear out the people that are here who shouldn't be here, and basically stop new people from coming in for the most part. And that will require what in the world of 2022, we'll say, or 2018 or whatever, that world and that media narrative would have considered draconian. It's going to require draconian action effectively relative to what we're meant to be used to. I think most people, if they had the freedom to answer, they'd say, do whatever, you know, within reason, to some sort of reason. But like, I mean, do what you got to do. I don't really care. Just get them out, basically, and stop this situation. So I don't know. It's like you have, and like I say, you have all this consternation going on around the country. You have it's extremely volatile, and they're someone like Helen McEntee is not even talking about it, and she's not even going halfway to acknowledge, listen, I'll just play the clip in a sec. Actually, it's probably for the best, but like, she's not even, like, the sensible thing to do, surely, from a totally cynical political standpoint, would be to simply go piecemeal on it. So like, say oh yeah, immigration has gotten a bit out of control, we need to get it down. Not only do we need to vet people at the airports and stuff, which is bare minimum low hanging fruit, and they barely even will grant us that, but like, more than that, we need to get the numbers under control, almost just like the Tories. Like, the Tories are like totally bullshitting the English people and have been forever, but at least they like sound off in the right kind of way as they're lying through their teeth to their people. Fair enough. Whereas our government won't even really do that at all. They won't, like, and again, I'll play the clip, but they're still just saying, no, immigration is brilliant. Not one less person should come in. If anything, it should be the same or more at the lowest. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And that's how it is. It's very worrying. And I wonder, is it just that they're extremist and like, they're not the politicians, they're just acting upon commands from, let's say, above and all that. But are they just that extreme that they've decided to go basically balls to the wall and say, let's just put the foot on the accelerator, no matter what happens in Ireland, no matter how crazy it gets, we're committing now to going all the way. We will, I'm speaking hypothetically on behalf of the state, let's say, my view of what the state are thinking, that they think if we have to start killing citizens basically on the street at protest marches and all this kind of stuff, if we have to run them over, if we have to go full on draconian police state on them and just to basically crush it by any means necessary, we're just going to do that. So if that's what we've committed to, then what would be the point in us changing our rhetoric or granting anything to these proles? Well, let's just, we're doing it now. We're going 100 miles an hour and that's it. Is it that they're consciously extremists like that? Or are they, which is a perennial debate when you look at trying to observe a state like this, or are they just, is that to give them too much credit? Is that too conspiratorial? Are they just, is there an institutional inertia and a sort of naivety where someone like McEntee, she's just a silly politician, but the political class, the NGOs, the various institutions like that are kind of running the show, are they just naive? Are they just sort of, have they just drank too much of their own Kool-Aid or whatever, let's say, and they're stuck? They just don't know how to step out of that environment and think logically and just be reasonable. I'd say it could be a bit of both, probably, but I mean, maybe it's that they only talk to each other. I don't know. I can't claim to understand the psychology of these people, I suppose. But let's just watch this McEntee video anyway, because it's kind of mad. I'll just share screen. Yeah, so that'll do. Let me know if there's any sound issues.
Were people who weren't born here, so it's not just the culture and their traditions and they themselves. Migration is good for this country. it is really positive and has always been positive for this country. As a country of people who have travelled to the four corners of the earth in solace, in seek of solace and in search of a better life, we know ourselves how important it is to be welcoming and to support people. And we, as people, have always been welcoming to those who seek asylum and who seek help. 20% of people who live here weren't born here. Our workforce of just under 500,000 people in our workforce were people who weren't born here. So it's not just the culture and their traditions and they themselves as people, the way that they enrich our society, but they pay taxes. They ensure that the schools that we have, the hospitals that run, people who run our...
Now, there's a lot there to sort of unpack. I mean, just to take for starters, the point about immigration is positive in Ireland. That's kind of the hook of this whole video. Immigration is a positive in Ireland, and it's just positive, and it's always positive. I mean, that's kind of cultish rhetoric, right? If she were like, I mean, should I just be their advisor or something like that? Like, you know, I don't really have a price. I'm not going to be bought off, but if I was, it'd be for a lot. But I'm not going to be bought off. But I mean, if I were the type to be bought off, I'd be like, do you not want to just pay me whatever you're paying the other guy? And like, it's pretty easy here. You can't come out and say stuff like that and expect to just not become an absolute hate figure and almost a laughing stock, even among what would be considered the centre in Ireland, like people who are like, oh, I'm a bit skeptical of immigration, aspects of it are out of control, but I think it's fine. I don't like racism or like that kind of like totally generic Derek character. Even they will be looking at her and thinking, what are you talking about? What, this is madness. You can't just come out, like I said, with the polling that we have and with just reality of the situation in Ireland and with the backlash. You can't just come out and say immigration is positive and has always been positive and it's amazing. You have to, at least for saving face purposes, say it's a mixed bag. It's got good, it's got some bad, it's got some negatives, it's got some issues that we should manage. Maybe we could manage better, but on the whole, I mean, if I was making the argument, I would say, listen, I would start getting into the multinationals. Well, the multinationals ultimately keep the public in the pay so much tax or whatever, right? Now I've a critique. I don't agree with that, but just as a devil's advocate, I'd maybe start talking about the multinationals, and you know, the maybe compare the economy, like these tired cliches. Oh, the economy of the early 90s versus now. At least those are sort of arguments. I don't know. But I mean, I would dispute those arguments too. So it's kind of all the one, it's kind of moot. But point being is that she should moderate slightly. And, or like, is there no voice in there that says, okay, look, we have gone down the road of immigration. We're going to keep going because that's the definition of our nation state now at the moment. But, you know, maybe we need to taper in the numbers and focus more, for example, on skilled people. Now, these are Tory, bland, fake arguments that are full of shit. They are. But at least, I'm just trying to get into the head here. At least if you said, because they always make the argument about, well, we need more builders, and like the housing crisis isn't an immigration isn't a problem for the housing crisis. In fact, it's the solution. We need more builders to build the houses, so we need more immigration, not less. And the same goes for the healthcare system. Oh, well, it's not actually pressure from the patients, millions of extra people on the system. In fact, it's au contraire. We need more people to staff the healthcare system. I recently saw, who was she? Jennifer Carol McNeil or something. Awful physiognomy. I'm not saying she's ugly. She's not ugly. But just like the physiognomy of the standard Irish politician, they all have their various different types. And it's like viscerally untrustworthy. It's crazy. But anyway, she was talking about how she works in insurance and there's not enough panel beaters and it's driving the cost of insurance through the roof. I just thought, how nuts have we gotten here? So we're talking. So we need more immigration for nurses and doctors and builders and plumbers and everything else, and bus drivers and panel beaters. We like this kind of nonsense. But But at least if like someone like Helen McEntee at the current moment came out and said, okay, immigration is part of our fabric of our society or whatever and our economy, but maybe we shouldn't just bring in immigrants willy-nilly. We should do the Australian style system where if you're going to make that argument about doctors, nurses and panel beaters, at least we're going to be very stringent that everyone who comes in must have a panel beating license or whatever, that they're experienced panel beaters and an experienced doctor. Basically, they'll come in, we'll have mass immigration, but it'll be to serve the country, not the country even, to serve the economy, the GDP. At least that's a sort of an argument. That's what they do in Australia as they're replacing the Australian people. That's what they do in England as they're replacing the English people, this like Indian government in London. But again, some people would like wince at what I'm saying. Why would you recommend that they just lie? I'm not recommending that. And if they did, I would dispute it at all levels. But I'm just trying to understand the insanity and the inertia or whatever it is, or the extremism, whatever's going on in Ireland is extra bad in a sense, because I suppose you could say it's lies either way, but isn't it, at least it shows a certain level of disconnect that someone like her and her advisors and all of this can't even sit down, can't, I don't know, for whatever reason, that they can't even bring themselves to make some sort of argument. They just say, it's wonderful, it's lollipops, it's rainbows, it's fantastic. Meanwhile, everyone in Ireland, not everyone, majority of people are feeling the pressure, trying to pay for your electricity and your gas and your car and your everything. It's like, and trying to get housing, a roof over your head, right? 75% of men between the ages of 25 and 29. It's slightly less for women. I focus on the male side of it just because it's 75%. It's like 70% for both men and women. 75% of men between 25 and 29 in Ireland are living at home, and I doubt they have, a lot of them have major prospects of leaving anytime soon. That's like a form of ethnic or anthropological castration, effectively, especially when you're bringing in men, Ukrainian men with their Porsche Cayennes, uninsured, driving past them every day. I mean, what does that do to the psyche? But so like, she's asking people not to believe their lying eyes, not to believe their lying brains and their lying wallets. Again, it's a lot of it just does come down to economic pressure. That's what's driving, like, people are annoyed about immigration, but it has gotten worse in the last few years. But you know, everyone's always known that when the chips are down, people will start to sober up a little bit and see things for what they are, and that's kind of what's happening now. I maintain, and I've said this before, that it's effectively like if you, back in the day, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, you worked Monday to Friday. It's almost like up in smoke your Friday and half of your Thursday has just gone. It's now like it's like you went down to a 3-day week at work or something, and you have to live off that now. But you're still working the 5 days, if not more. And you know, that's all well and good. That's, you know, if someone's on social welfare, that's maybe one thing. If everything you get is from the state, or if you're very, very wealthy, if you're on well into 6 figures, you're in 180 grand salary or whatever it is, right? And you still probably have a lot of debt, but at least in that scenario, you do have a lot of cushion. But for a lot of people, anyone, I would say anyone under 6 figures at all in the country is on a mad squeeze now. And so for her to just turn around and say immigration is wonderful, when that's the life so many Irish people are living, and they go to the hospital, they have to wait, you know, years for an appointment for a painful issue, perhaps. And if they go into the A&E, like Aoife Johnston, 16-year-old girl, you're just left to die with septic shock from meningitis, which should be seen. The recommended time to be kind of addressed in a hospital for that is like 15 minutes, time of the essence. She was there 15 hours later. 15 hours from the PM to the AM, was laying there contorting, vomiting green, sitting on chairs, pushed into a storeroom while her parents screamed for help. 15 hours. Now that doesn't just happen. And I don't want to go off on a tangent about it too much, but that doesn't just happen because the hospital administration is bad, or the regional reconfiguration of hospitals wasn't a good idea, or whatever. That doesn't happen just because, or take individual ineptitude from doctors. That doesn't happen just from that. You can't. I mean, if you let's say you had an ordinary hospital, and that was not under too much pressure. It was under a reasonable amount of pressure, population proportional to staff. Like a reasonable hospital, just Ireland 30 years ago or whatever. You could have probably brought her into hospital in the state that she was in, and you could have put white coats and stethoscopes on me, on you, on Helen McEntee, and a bunch of other random people, and we could probably, between Google, common sense, and just that's all. That alone would have been able to look at her and say, "Oh well, the note she has from her GP says he's worried about sepsis and meningitis, so Google tells me here we need to get antibiotics into her straight away." And even if you were 2-3 hours late on getting to that, that would probably have been enough. The inquest found for her to survive, if she had been given treatment at any reasonable time. So again, medical ineptitude can't even be the answer. If someone who's not even a doctor, probably if given half a chance, surely could have spotted that, or even a nurse. But no, it was just overcrowding. In the articles they talked about that it was like a war zone. This is in the inquest, a war zone, that there were people laying and sitting on every surface in there, the floors, against the walls, on trolleys, on chairs, on everything, right? People's bodies basically strewn across the entire emergency room. That's a consequence of overpopulation, obviously. It's other factors can matter too, but the chief issue there is overpopulation, and perhaps a lack of an ability for the staff to communicate effectively with each other via language barriers. That's just a suspicion I have, we'll say. And like I've said online on Twitter, is that if it were the case that the reality of the situation was that it was to do with overpopulation via mass immigration, via government policy, and as a subsequent consequence of that, an inability to effectively communicate. Like someone could technically speak English and pass the test, but it could be a bit ropey. We've all been in hospitals. Sometimes you don't really know what he's saying. He doesn't know what you're saying. You can imagine if you're dealing with what they described as a war zone, it very much matters that if you say something in that limited 5 seconds you have between 10 different patients to someone else, she's septic, meningitis, she needs to be taken to resus and given antibiotics. If you say that quickly, you don't have more time, because if you spend longer trying to transfer that point, the other person over here is maybe going to die, or someone's screaming with a open fracture or whatever. So you require, when the system is breaking down, the SOPs are breaking down just under the sheer volume of it, you require the human dynamic to work perfectly. It has to. And if Raj or whatever kind of passed his English test, but he didn't really get it, I don't think he really picked up on what I said there, because I said it quickly. Well, then that's how communication breaks down. And in that inquest and in that scenario with Aoife Johnston, it concluded that there were about 3 or 4 separate times where the triage nurse from one person to the next, there were multiple opportunities for someone to pick up on it, even under all that pressure, and see it. And yet it kept falling through the cracks, through the Swiss cheese, the lining up of opportunities for mistakes. That kept happening. I don't think it's a jump for me to conclude that language has an issue there in communication. Anyway, that was a terrible situation. I keep talking about it, I keep bringing it up, I keep going on tangents, but I don't think people appreciate how the gravity of situations like that with Aoife Johnston, and how I will speak a bit more on it here, is that, like I said, my analysis, just from the outside looking in, my speculation, we'll call it, if it turned out just like in North Korea or something, or some country we look at a certain way, where they have their own taboos and all of that you can't talk about, would it be like if I were to go to all the doctors and nurses who were interviewed in that inquest and say, listen, if that were ultimately that's really what caused this to happen, is that what happened? You have truth serum, you have lie detector on, nobody's going to hear it but me, I'm asking you secretly here, is that the case? If and this is all an if they were to say to me, yeah, you're kind of bang on the money, that basically is the issue, but I can't say that, that's verboten. I can't come out and say it's too many immigrants being brought in, we can't deal with that, we can't staff a hospital. Even if you bring in immigrant staff, just the turnaround isn't quick enough to keep up with how many people are coming in. And yes, it does make it hard when you're under pressure. The last savior is going to be verbal communication when everything else falls apart. And if that doesn't work, things like Aoife Johnson happen. They might well agree with me that that is a big part of it. Would they, in an inquest? I think you all know the answer fully well. Would they, in an inquest, be willing to say that? No, of course they wouldn't. They will say, oh, well, the SOPs were a bit off, the this and that and the other, and let's just call it medical misadventure and wrap it up, and the same thing will happen in a year's time, and we'll mea culpa on that again and again and again. So it's like, how are you going to stop things like that from happening if you can't, if nobody in a position to is free to call a spade a spade? Now, while this is happening, Helen McEntee is telling you that everything is rosy in the garden, while police are pepper spraying people. Think about how nuts it is, right? That in Newtown, Mount Kennedy, now I was there a few days ago. I went up there on the first day of protest after the violence had happened the previous night, whenever that was. But you know, I was there and everything had cooled off at that stage. The drama had happened the night before. This was a peaceful, almost kind of somber mood on the first protest. The subsequent one, Phil Dwyer streamed up both of them. I was at the first one. The first one had a somber mood, a low energy. The second one, by all accounts, from what I could see, was high energy. Point being, both of those days were peaceful. They weren't melees or anything like that. And yet I was at that first one, a somber, peaceful, quiet, daytime lit, you know, event that was well away from the asylum center property. And there was Garda helicopters circling overhead. When we got to the barrier, as close up to the asylum property as you can get, the guards have this barrier up, blocking people from walking from one end of a road to another in their own community. You have on site, from the drone footage that people got, on site, you have multiple Garda vans. You probably have, I wouldn't be surprised at night, helicopters going around with infrared cameras and all this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if you have mass surveillance going on via phones. Think of the Dark Knight, Morgan Freeman sort of machine type of thing, a mass surveillance thing. I wouldn't be surprised if they have the full spectrum surveillance and police state, almost like a military operation in play around Newtown, Mount Kennedy. You saw the night, I think it was the night before the drama happened up there. The night before, I think it was, where at 3 or 4 in the morning, they brought in convoys of about 6 or 7 massive trucks up to this tiny country area under heavy police escort. Now, this was like something out of, I keep referencing films, like something out of Sicario, where they cross into Mexico, right? With this, they're like transporting El Chapo or something like that. You have all that going on. You know, just to, by their view, it's like, oh, well, it's just a few migrants. We're just helping people. It's no big deal. Everybody's delighted. This is wonderful. It's like, well, if it was so wonderful, maybe you would have a couple of cranks. Maybe you'd have me on YouTube bleating on about immigration, and outside the center, you would have 2 people, like in another TV reference, like Father Ted Down with that sort of thing. You'd have 1 or 2, and, you know, you could dismiss that as some fringe figures or whatever. But when it necessitates helicopters circling around a town of about a couple of thousand people, and where basically everyone is out, like I'd say the population of that town was out. Some people were from outside of town, most people were from town, all out, man, woman, child, old, young, where you have civil order breakdown up at the site, where you have, and this is crucial, this is what troubled me almost more than anything, the night of the drama, we'll call it, where the guards, the riot police, storming around Newtown, Mount Kennedy, the town itself, the apartments and all of that, by all accounts, just basically pepper spraying people effectively at their front doors, just spraying people as they went by, shouting at people, telling people to get in their house, effectively putting a whole town, a town of middle class commuters into Dublin, people who usually wouldn't raise a peep, you know, having to put a town like that, I don't think it's exaggerating, to put a town like that for a period under martial law with helicopters circling above. I mean, if it's no big deal that you're bringing in a few migrants, then what's the issue? What's all this for, right? So it's crazy, and she's just here telling us how wonderful it is. It's just nuts. I'll finish the video.
On our building sites that all of this operates. And so much of the commentary that we hear and see in this house is feeding into that that hatred and that division and that blatant racism that we're seeing right across the country at the moment. Attacks on Gardaí, our deputy who's leaving the House now referred to our Gardaí as gangs. It's completely unacceptable behaviour, and I think we all need to understand the responsibility that we have in this House when we talk about people and the huge contribution so many of them make and will make.
Yeah, so I've actually gotten so into my ramble that I've missed a couple of points you made just very quickly.
How important it is to be welcoming and to support people, and we.
So, like that's another thing, right? The idea of welcoming and supporting people, like, it's not incumbent on people to welcome anyone at the behest of a can of pepper spray, right? So if I go into your house and I bring 10 men into the house and you say, well, first off, right, this is low-hanging fruit. You say, who are they? Where do they come from? Are they, to use the famous word, are they vetted? And I say to you, well, I mean, you know, whatever. And then you subsequently find out, no, I don't know who they are or where they came from, to be honest. But I have, let's call it 3 men. Let's be more reasonable. The average house can't accommodate 3 men, right? You take 3 men and you say, yeah, I don't know who they are. He doesn't speak English. He, you know, is like, doesn't look the most friendly, let's say. And the other one maybe is all right. We don't know. But we're bringing these 3 men into your house. And then you say, okay, well, no. And they say, oh, you haven't got a choice. And then they pepper spray you in the face. And then they take your bedroom, your other bedrooms, and you and your kids are put on the couch, and you have to sleep at night with these men in your house. Meanwhile, the person who did it goes home to their own house where they're not taking anyone. They're fine. They're wealthy. They're protected. And then they start lecturing you about the merits and the virtues of welcoming people. That's not how welcoming works. So she's talking about it like it's, again, the Cade made a fault. Oh, the kettle is on for the guy from Algeria or whatever. Aren't we so very Irish welcoming people? I mean, again, I'm back to helicopters flying around, pepper spray, Irish people living in increasing deprivation and poverty. This kind of rhetoric about we're very welcoming and we went to the 4 corners of the earth. It's just insane. I think we're past the point of answering that stuff. Like, there's some people will write like a 10,000 word essay on why we went to the 4 corners of the earth narrative is wrong and debunking it and stuff. It's like, I think we just dismiss that entirely. Okay. For obvious reasons. I mean, it's just nuts. I could actually go off on like 15-20 minutes about that, but I should probably not. I mean, the basic is that for one, we did not all go to Algeria. For 2, we didn't go with not just UBI but babysitting. We didn't get babysat where every need of ours was catered to, and we just sat around in hotels having taken the piss, and that didn't happen. I think I mentioned this already. We didn't go to Algeria and all these places anyway. So the 4 corners of the world is kind of stretching the point a little bit, actually, to be honest. And beyond that, of course, the whole idea that if I say, oh, my Irish blood, my Irish ancestors, I'm really Irish. These other people are immigrants. They're not Irish like me and all this. They'll say, no, you're not. No, we're all Irish. Umbungu on the RTE propaganda eating potatoes and isn't he lovely? And like handing out soup on O'Connell Street or something. He's just as Irish, if not more Irish than you are, and all this. Well, it's kind of like, okay, so when I want to be Irish for my sake, I can't be. But when I have a multiple centuries blood debt, universal cosmic blood debt, based on just an honor transfer spanning centuries and rooted in blood and ancestry, going back 10, 20 generations, and it's transferable, it's fungible from the American or the English person who had to accept Irish people coming in. It's fungible to Pakistanis and Algerians because it's a cosmic law of morality rooted in blood debt. I mean, it's nuts. It doesn't make any sense. It's the kind of nonsense someone comes out with to just dispossess you. Meanwhile, she's fine. And again, another thing as well is that if you were to just take Helen McEntee, Roderick O'Gorman, Brian Killoran, or any of these NGO people, any of them, right? Or one of these boomers who goes on about, oh, sure, didn't we go everywhere? Any of that. If you take any of them and you strip them of their assets, you say, no more, you're down now to a 28-year-old Irish man who's trying to get by in life. That's not that we talk about these people like they're young. That shouldn't be young. You should have possessions, a stake in society, everything at that point. There's nothing young about being 28, right? But if you were to take any of these people and strip them of all assets, take you right back to a 28-year-old, and this isn't typical of every 28-year-old, let's say, but let's go with me, right? You're stripped of your house and your assets and all your like wealth that you could lean into. You're stripped of that. You're stripped of your house, and what you have now is a McDonald's hat, right? And you go into McDonald's and you do 9 to 5. All the staff are foreign. Well, not all of them. A lot of them are foreign. So straight away, it's kind of alienating. You're not in a Dare house now at the hotel at your friend's wedding with your €1,000 outfit on and rocking up in your new BMW, and they're all Irish and they're all caked up in makeup, and you're in this other world, where it actually is almost very Irish. Like you look at wealthy D4 people in their little circles and stuff. It's, there might be the one foreign friend or black or whatever, but generally it's a very Irish affair, and so is their workplace and stuff. But now we'll transfer you into McDonald's, where you're with the proles, the Irish proles, the foreign proles, everyone. And your man, the guy from Bangladesh, is telling you didn't scrape the Merry Chef or the cooker well enough, right? And you're going to need to do it again. And then the next day, and you sweat your balls off, hypothetically, your proverbials, doing it, paid not much. They say McDonald's is actually a decent employer relatively, but go with me on this. And then the next day, the same guy is bringing you in again to say, well, look, we're going to sit down and we have to have a chat about, you need to step up your game on the Merry Chef, right? And then you go home and you spend half an hour trying to wash the grease out of your fingernails and your hands and your hair. And you look at your rent, that you're living in a bedroom with a bunch of people, and maybe even sharing a bedroom. You can never save. You can never basically own a car. You can't even consider going on holidays at all. Not just to a foreign country, but to Ireland, to Kerry, to Galway, whatever. €350 a night for a hotel or something if you're doing well. I mean, you can't afford that at all. I mean, it's not even that you can't afford it. It's beyond even thinking about. And so your life is just this grind, this awful, tyrannical grind. What we would have viewed people in Kowloon in Hong Kong, this awful slave existence back in the day or something like that. You're living that life now. Now go around and tell me how amazing immigration is. Now tell me how wonderful it is. You're not going to go to the hospital because if you are the doctor, because you're working. And like I say, the margins are already beyond tight for you. You can barely feed yourself. Your hot water bottles at night, you're all that. And you go into work 40 plus hours a week, scraping the oven or whatever, right? And then, because you're working, you're not quite on the dole or any of that. So that sore tooth you have, you just go to bed at night and you think, I hope that doesn't get worse. I hope it doesn't get worse because I don't have €100 to go in and spend on it, or it could be €500, could be 1,000. You don't know what it's going to be. You don't have it. So you just have to hope your teeth don't get worse. You have to hope nothing goes wrong. You have to hope nothing breaks. You have to hope your phone doesn't fall and break, or whatever the item might be. That's before you even have any stake in society, property, possessions, a car, dignity, any of that. Now go around and tell me how great immigration is. Helen McEntee or Roderick O'Gorman or anyone else. Tell me how amazing it is then, because I can guarantee you that if you perform that exercise on them, they would be up at Newtown Mount Kennedy ASAP, supporting them all the way. They would be on this stream clicking like. They'd be maybe not giving me a super chat because they don't have money, but they would change their tune extremely quickly. And that's the goal of it. So anyway, that's talking about the. Let's see what else she said.
People have always been welcoming and who seek help.
Welcoming.
20% of people who live here weren't born here. Our workforce of just
about that thing. 20% of people who live here weren't born here. People say 20% of people are foreigners because that's the stat. But of course, if you consider nationality to be at least semi-related to ethnicity, that's a big conversation. But if nationality is synonymous to an extent, we'll say, on a spectrum with ethnicity, and ancestry and all of that, well, of course, think of all the anchor babies, the Africans who were born here in 2004, or whatever, you name it, right? There's a whole ton of people who were born here. There's people at this point who were born here whose parents were born here. Somebody was born here in 2004 and they just had a kid. That kid and them were both born in Ireland. Now, there are scenarios where neither of those people, the one who's just been born and the one who gave birth to that child, who themselves was born here in 2004, there are scenarios where neither of them speak English, not to mind Irish. They are, we'll say, Roma Gypsy, they're part of their Pakistani community or whatever it is like that, and they don't really speak English at all. Which brings me on to the next thing she mentions here.
Under 500,000 people.
Of course, to caveat, obviously, I'm not saying that about every foreigner, but these are real scenarios. So it's like, it just goes to show that the foreign-born population thing is almost moot at this point. It's to say it's 20%. I'd say it's pushing on, when you consider the shadow population, the ones who aren't really registered here at all, that they're kind of they're working in meat factories or this or that or whatever, or they're just, there's like a house where one of these houses in like Dorset Street in Dublin, somewhere there, where you've a couple of people, you can imagine a couple of them are on the radar, but then there's like 10 other people in the house who are probably coming and going in and out of the country and stuff like that. They're not really registered or known about. So when you consider all that and you judge accurately, I'd say we're pushing up on half the population probably already, or maybe it's 40%, maybe it's 38%, maybe it's 42%, 48%, but we're pushing well closer to half than quarter or a fifth, I would say, at this point. But and like I say, the many won't speak English. She mentions here
in our workforce were people who weren't born here. So it's not just the culture and their traditions and they themselves as people.
So their culture and their traditions. I've said it before, but we had a situation after I think it was the Dublin riots, where every liberal, shitlib or whatever in Ireland was coming out, all these kind of Dublin, like two boys brew kind of types, these kind of brunch types living in Dublin city centre, working for an NGO or whatever it is. So they were sort of all coming out. It was phenomenal, actually, that this happened. It was remarkable, because all of them, almost like they had some mind virus, they all kept coming out and saying tweets to the effect of, I went to the nail salon today and I had a Chinese nail technician. Then I got a taxi and I had an African taxi driver. Then I went for lunch and my Brazilian waiter served me a delicious brunch. And then I went to the nightclub and the Polish bouncer, who I know from the times I go to the club, let me in. So actually, immigrants I was served by a lot of immigrants today. So that's what's keeping Dublin going, or something like that. And again, that at the time, that revealed the bias that is apparent to me always. But they kind of stuck their necks out there. They were so ignorant that they didn't realize how, even from a liberal point of view, that sounded naff. That's all they could say, is that I was served by these people. So unlike what McEntee is saying here, which is
the way that they enrich our society, but they pay taxes, they ensure that the schools that we have, the that run, people who are on our building sites,
like they enrich us with their culture and their heritage and stuff like that. These people no more care about the culture and heritage. I mean, if I asked Helen McEntee about, let's just say Bangladesh, right? If I said, tell me anything about Bangladesh, we probably have a significant enough Bangladeshi population here and there. Tell me one thing about Bangladesh, besides they're known for being like a textile exporter or something like that. You probably know that, and they flood quite a bit. It's a estuary or whatever. Tell me something about it. Tell me about the partition of the Indian subcontinent and the Bengali people. What's the story with them? Where else can you find Bengali people outside of Bangladesh? What provinces in India? Tell me anything about their religion, their history, their culture, going back thousands of years and all this stuff. Tell me anything about them. She wouldn't know anything about it. Completely detached. Or Brazilian history. Tell me about any of that. Tell me about the different regions in Brazil. Tell me about the different ethnic political groups. Tell me about all the culture wars that do go on there and stuff like that. Nothing. Wouldn't know anything about it. So I see some super chats coming in there. Thank you very much, guys. By the way, I'll read them in, I suppose, at the end. Hopefully, you're sticking around for that. But it's just crazy, you know, to talk about it like that. And these people don't mix at all, like, and they don't know anything about culture or appreciate or value culture or whatever. I mean, I don't mean to play this game too much, but you know, people who know me will know that I'm supposedly right, the big bad far right or something like that. Someone like Helen McEntee would be pretty quick to call me that, racist or far right. But anyone who knows me knows that if I get in a taxi or if I'm in some situation in public where I'm talking to a foreigner and I talk to a Pakistani, straight away I'm talking about Imran Khan, the American coup, this, that, and the other, the Baluchi situation, all this kind of stuff. I want to talk about all that with them and chat away with them about it. And again, I'm not trying to appeal to the foreigner or anything here, but you know, most times I'll get a chance to chat with someone. I actually do want to learn about their culture, because I would be very quick to say, well, we're different, and I'm a proud person of my own background, and so are you, I'd like to imagine. So let's talk about, I want to actually learn about it. And they'll be like, oh, you know about this and you know about that and you're interested in it, and they'll be so warm, and because you get the impression that no one ever talks to them about where they're from, really. Some people would even be too caught in political correctness where they think it might be impolite to ask, whereas I'm like, no, you're Pakistani, like, you know what I mean, obviously, and I see it, and that's it. So it's just the culture thing is nuts. I don't want to like sound, you know, glib about it or whatever, but or like exoticizing things too much, but it's just the whole Helen McEntee is full of shit, is what I'm saying.
Like that, all of this operates. And so much of the commentary that we hear and see in this house.
So that's what she said. Will I go off screen now? I mean, I can talk about, I thought I was going to have some structure on this stream, I suppose, but I was like, I'll talk about Helen McEntee, I'll talk about Newtown Mount Kennedy, do a background and overview of Newtown Mount Kennedy, but I think via rambling on Helen McEntee, I've kind of already spoken about Newtown Mount Kennedy. So any other stuff here? Bear with me. This always happens where I have like two screens in front of each other, so I can't. It's hard to manage them. So there was also, I could just go watch videos from Newtown Mount Kennedy of like people being pepper sprayed and all that. I just kind of think you've seen it. You know what I mean? I think most of you get the idea. I've kind of talked about it in passing about Helen McEntee anyway, so it's kind of moot. Let's go through just before it, so it doesn't end up getting left on the kind of cutting room floor. I want to read this Burkean article, and I'll try to fly through it, I suppose. But I'll also just talk about it myself. So my view on the British-Irish situation, in sum, I'll start with the conclusion and go backwards, is that it is complete nonsense. I do have a ramble in me on this, actually. Stick around for it. So, like, it basically is nonsense. I've felt like even the EU Migration Pact discussion, I have a whole video on this, but I think it should be opposed and all of that. And it, you know, I don't want to demoralize anyone. Oppose it, fight against it, stop it, and all that. But in a sense, it's kind of like, it's kind of moot, you know, going back, because it's like the conversation around immigration. Helen McEntee is completely off with the fairies on this, right? And so are most of them. But insofar as they do bring it to the table of discussion, the migration issue, they're deluded, but sometimes they'll bring it to the table. And they'll always bring it to the table, in a sense, in this sideways, tangential fashion. So it's kind of about the EU Migration Pact. And that is a problem, because what they're doing is trying to cede their responsibility for that to a foreign and unaccountable, invisible man behind the curtain. And then they can just wash their hands and say, well, look, it's not my issue, you know. So that's a problem. But then the next week, we've gone from sort of EU Migration Pact to the Common Travel Area with the UK or Britain, whatever. And it's about the Tories. Oh no, it's the dastardly Tories. John McGurk, my good buddy John McGurk, has put up a piece about that, defending the defending the Anglos a little bit, kind of, he was implying that like the Irish state is engaging in its favorite pastime of bashing the Anglo, bashing the Brits, and trying to sort of offload their own problems and their own policies to the old enemy or whatever, right? And he's kind of sort of right about that, in a sense that, yeah, it's very easy to just create this sort of Big Brother, or, and not like the 1984, but the shitty TV show Big Brother, or a Love Island kind of drama. And there's nothing, the pros love more than a bit of bread and circuses, I suppose. So it works. I can see how it works perfectly for both the Brits, the Tory Westminster government, and for the Dáil in Dublin and all the NGOs and Egypt's there. It kind of suits both parties in a sense. And I sympathize with any nation, whether it's Japan, obviously to a lesser extent, or the UK, or Bhutan, or anyone who is suffering this kind of denationalization via global power structures and all that. I will always side with the people, whether it's the Amazon rainforest people with the bulldozer coming in to clear their land for wood, or like I say, whether it's the Bhutanese, or whether it's Imran Khan being deposed, or anything. I'll always stand with nationalists, effectively, and that the same goes for English nationalists. So I see this a mile away. It's more Tory bait for their own population, so they can sort of appeal to this whole idea that, oh, we'll put it on the Irish. And also they're sort of, even though their Rwanda policy is nonsense and it's for the birds, they can kind of claim that the Rwanda policy, which I don't fully understand, it's not my business in a way, the idea of you're going to relocate asylum seekers to Rwanda. I mean, what more is there to say about this stuff? But like, that's, in order to try to act like that policy is sort of successful, they can say, look at all these migrants that are flowing through Britain into Northern Ireland and down into Dublin with these like open borders cooks in Dublin, whereas us and our tough policy, our tough English policy is working so well, which is kind of nonsense. And then for Dublin, of course, it's we have to take a stand against the Westminster Tories. They're flooding our country from the north. I'm gonna get really serious now and meet with whichever Indian it is from London, to talk about it. It's just pure drama from both sides, and that's kind of almost my conclusion. Just total nonsense. But then on the other hand, and I'll get into the Burkean article, because again they say it very well, but I'll just give my tuppence first. Which is largely the same, but is that the north of Ireland is a bit of a cleavage. It's a bit of an issue in terms of solving the migration question, because it's so complicated by our entanglement with Brussels, and then we sort of have an entanglement with London via the north of Ireland. It's kind of like the national question in terms of reunification, the question of the 6 counties. It's sort of come back in to prescient and relevant on a whole new level now. And it's so complicated, because think of how complicated and sort of irreconcilable the Northern Ireland conflict was, with this million odd loyalists or whatever up there, and then you have the oppression of Catholics, and it's like, well, how are you going to please everyone and find peace? On top of that, you add this global migration situation, which is at the behest of multinational corporations and finance institutions. Then you add in Brussels, which is semi-related to all that. I mean, think of how if this island were just an island run under a sovereign government, even if it was a bad government, but it's just this island. Let's say we don't have a connection to the EU. We're part of like a trading bloc, but it's not that integrated the way it is now. And we don't have the Northern Ireland issue. So we're just effectively an actual sovereign island nation, but we just have a very bad open borders government that's run by multinationals and all that. That itself would be a tremendously complicated, riddled situation, because of course you have to disembed all of these NGOs and all of this institutional inertia and all of the Gombeans and all of that, and they're going to push back, and then you will have the multinationals from outside sowing color counter revolutions effectively, and you're going to have to sort of ban them. You're going to have to go down Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, whatever, you name the nation, but you're going to have to go tough on that, and you're going to have to sort of respond in kind to that sort of subversive activity, which is going to be complicated, ever changing, fraught. But then, and that would be if you had a sovereign single island nation state with no major supranational investment going on. But then you had Brussels in, then you had London in, and you had Belfast in. And it's a disaster, obviously, in a sense. In one sense, it's like I consider myself someone who's deeply invested in this, and I think about it all the time, and it makes my head spin to think about all of the moving parts. This almost makes my head spin so much that I don't consider, but like this, the weak part of my mind, my morale, gets overwhelmed, and I think, oh man, this is so bad, like so many layers. And I actually wrote on my notes a while ago. This might seem like a totally silly sentence that doesn't make any sense, and this is kind of like a, what's the word? I can't think of the word for it. It's tautology or something like that. But and I was kind of almost writing a note to myself, like morally. I was thinking about this, and what I said is, what is required is what is necessary. In the sense that it's so demoralizing to think about that massive tangled web of a situation we have in several different dimensions, and you think, how can you do that? What are we meant to do? Why not just give up? Because that's the mentality a lot of people go with. And it's like, well, whatever is required is what is necessary. Or you could flip that, and what is necessary is required, maybe is a better way of putting it, or putting it, is that, like, the alternative is worse. So for example, if we all just pack our bags and say we can't do that, it's too dug in, it's too deep, and it's too bad. Let's just basically cede the floor to McEntee. Let's cede the floor to the NGOs and just bury your head in the sand. That's worse. It's like, as bad and as seemingly insoluble as the situation is, in a way, even if you're being productive and cognizant of it all, as bad as that is, the alternative is clearly, when you actually stop and think about it, the alternative is worse. The alternative is worse. Sorry, it's, think about the impoverishment and the alienation and the danger and all of that. Especially if you have kids. I have 2 kids who I adore, like anybody else does. To look at this entanglement in the north and in Brussels and all of this, and the NGOs and the strife that is inevitably going to come, that I dare not even speculate on, right? That's pales in comparison, because when I think of my kids, and I think of just the basic concept of justice and what is right must prevail, the human yearning for that, to resist the darkness, the kind of tyranny and defeat and oppression. When I think about like that, it becomes very clear, and I get that clarity. It's easy then to think, oh yeah, to reverse what I said, what is necessary is what's required, or vice versa. It's like, yeah, it might be too much, might be necessary, and yes, it is what it is. We have to just try and figure it all out, and we have to push back on every front. And I can't guarantee what's going to happen, but we must keep going. We must go forward. So it's kind of a bit of a tangent, I suppose, but it's like, there was someone recently, in, just again, tangent within tangent, Philip Dwyer recently live streamed from Aughrim in County Wicklow. Actually, let's add one further tangent. Wicklow is my absolute heaven. I've spent a bit of time there, here and there, on holidays, back when one could afford a holiday in Ireland. I've visited friends there. I've hiked mountains there. I've driven through there multiple times. All of that. And I only discovered Wicklow within the last 7-8 years, I'd say. It is the most, and I defy you in the chat, we all have our preferences. It's the most beautiful county in Ireland, in my view, full stop. Might be one of the most beautiful places in the world. The sense when you drive down from Dublin into Wicklow, into the old military road, or if you go into British Bay, or you go around to Glendalough through there, and all the way down, if I'm not mistaken, all the way down deep kind of into Aughrim, and all of the different country roads, the different ways you can go is like something I could talk about for hours. The different routes you could take, and and how beautiful and snaking and tree laden it is, and the hills and everything. Absolutely adore that county. So anyway, Aughrim being Deep Wicklow. Phil Dwyer was there streaming. He was with Darren McGovern, and they were sort of holding court a little bit at a meeting, a town meeting, which is a whole other thing about the asylum center there and everything. And there was one guy, I think, I didn't see all of it. I kind of saw what he said, and then I saw someone refer to what he said. The question was basically something along the lines of, well, if we go down the road of Newtown Mount Kennedy, let's say, and we end up getting defeated, and we put everything in, and we blockade, and we do all that, and the guards pepper spray us, and one of us goes to jail, and la 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 la. We go through the motions. This is what the nationalists are offering us, this resistance, let's say, this idealistic resistance. But say we just end up getting crushed, and the migrants get put in there anyway. Would it not be better to maybe negotiate now with the Gombean owner of the center and the Department of Integration and all that, and maybe try to get some concessions, maybe a new playground, or you name it, try to get some concessions for the community, as opposed to resisting with no guarantee of success, but just resisting. That kind of my spiel there about what's necessary and all that, it kind of comes from that. And I've heard the likes of that argument a million times. It's a natural tendency of some local people to kind of go there, to just skip through it logically and think, this is hopeless. Let's just fold. Let's just fold and do the best we can, and hide. And it's sort of a very sad mentality. But it's also understandable. You have to always give the devil its due. It's understandable. It's fair. It's a fair argument to make. And we have to resolve that, and we have to think about that, have some sort of answer to that, because it's like, well, to some extent, what he's saying is absolutely true, debatably. And it's like, I think you have to go into, like, I don't know, you have to go into the monastery a bit on that sort of thing. You have to go deep on that. And it's hard to communicate that point to someone. Most people just get it inherently, which is what you saw in Newtown Mount Kennedy. Everybody did resist, and they had no guarantee of success at all. Far from it. Almost a guarantee of no success, because of eventually the state troopers will come or whatever. But it's like, most people inherently understand the value of resisting anyway. But it's that guy in Aughrim kind of reminded me of it. And the same goes for if you expand it out to Brussels and London and multinationals. What happens when the multinationals pull business, as they've done in lots of US states, when US states impose anti-transgender conversion for kids, when they put in laws, and companies within the US pull from the state, and then the state legislature fold because of that. How are we going to deal with that problem? I have conversations with people all the time. What are we going to do about that? So what, like, we people on our phones here, totally disempowered and hunted by the state, we're sitting around like trying to support people in Newtown Mount Kennedy and do all this, but on the background we're laden with the thoughts of, how are we going to create a resilient domestic economy? We have no power, but how are we going to do that? Or how are we going to cross that bridge when we get to it? Well, we'll think about it. We'll figure it out. We have people who think about those things, and also we'll just have to. It'll be chaotic, but we must keep going forward. We must. So the big ideas at play here, and the future is so fraught. But whether you're talking to someone at Aughrim who is feeling hopeless, or whether you're looking at international geopolitics that comes across as hopeless, we're against such an array of opposition and enemies here. It doesn't matter. It all comes back to the same fundamental principle, that it must be opposed no matter what. And it's not hopeless. Some of these bright sparks who are thinking about, well, a domestic economy and this and multipolarity and all these things, people are thinking about this stuff, but And the beauty is that I think we're thinking about it at a deeper and a stronger level and with more commitment than we go back to Helen McEntee or Roderick or Brian Killoran on his shitty wage to advocate for the replacement of Irish people. We're thinking about it better and more than they are, and it's coming from the heart stronger than it is from them. So I mean, that has a power of its own. And then the entropy of the history, or whatever you want to call it, the chaos of history, to my mind, it's pointing in our direction, and so we have obvious truth on our side. I mean, it's a small fact, or it's no small fact, excuse me, that like I alluded to at the beginning of the stream, almost everybody is on our side anyway. So, you know, in one sense, you think, oh, it's hopeless, but then you think, wait, the majority of the population, almost everyone, is on our side, and they have no representation, and we have been given this responsibility. And I say we because I'm streaming and all that, but like, I mean, I'm not doing this on my own, and um, far from it. You know, it's not. There's no single man or little circle or clique or anything can take this. It's as much on, even if you're anonymous at home, you just quietly watch. It's as much on you as it is on me, as it is on Phil, as it is on everybody else. Um, but it's, I think it's a welcome burden. I think it's a good thing, and you know, as much as there is against us, there's so much for us as well. So anyway, so many rambles. I don't want to just read the article verbatim, but they have some points. So on this, and I don't think there's an author mentioned. I think it's just from the Burkean, which is a pity in a way, because I'd love to give credit to whoever wrote this. But so how do I not just read the whole thing verbatim? You can find this on Burkean. Just look up Burkean online. Burkean, what's the title? Gunboat Asylum Policy. Yeah, so some points. I'll just read the points because they have bullet points helpfully. The North begins again. Regardless of Dublin's dysfunctional attitude towards the refugee crisis, this week should highlight the continued perniciousness of partition. Only one jurisdiction can exist in the era of replacement migration. One hopes it will run by Irishmen rather than increasingly Indian Tories. The Brussels angle. This internationalization means that migration is not just an issue behind the cordon sanitaire anymore, but a genuine security risk to the very survival of the state, especially as the EU and UK face a decade of post-Brexit transition and regulatory wars, and expansion of war beckons on the continent, which of course it does. Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Transnistria, the Baltic states, all of that. And then there's, of course, a culture and an economic and a political war going on behind the scenes there too. They're removing the triple lock neutrality system in Ireland. They're already deneutralizing Ireland as we speak. So I wouldn't underrate that aspect either. But an all-Ireland approach to migration is not just a Republican fantasy, but a geopolitical essential. It really is. It's become now part of the nationalist movement. It's always been part of the nationalist movement. We want our six-pack and all of that. But the national movement, as regards mass immigration in a globalized context, it's now become part of that. We need our island in its full state to proceed with this. We kind of do. And in a way, it makes reunification easier, I think, because I mean, I think Ireland is ahead of Britain in terms of the nationalist movement. I speak nationalism in terms of anti-mass immigration. We're far ahead of England. No disrespect to the English patriots and nationalists and all that of their own country, but we, for whatever reason, we have a much more awakened base and all of that. Maybe one of the best in the Western world, I'd say probably the best. So we're far more advanced than they are in terms of our culture and our politics on it, even though the official politics is lagging. Point being, in terms of installing a nationalist government or rebellious, praise myself here, rebellious disposition in the country, let's say, like on a mass, like universal scale, that's going to happen in Ireland far quicker or ever than it's going to happen in England. That's just a fact. I think most English would agree. So you're left in a position where, let's say we can get enough TDs and councillors and MEPs and all this in, and then we have this civil unrest happening in the background, which is most unfortunate, and all of that, peaceful, legal, everything. But we have all that happening, the chaos unfolding, and the political advance where we get our own people in. I don't think there's going to be a massive political revolution in a few months in Ireland in June, but someone's getting in. You know, that's the thing, is that someone's getting in either to a council seat, or as paltry as it may be, or a TD seat, or a MEP. I would have, and look, I might end up eating my words. Maybe I'll be bitterly disappointed, and so be it. But there's a good chance that a few years ago, when I made my video in Listún Varna, and I was talking into my phone, felt like a lunatic, and there were like a couple of anonymous people on Twitter. I was in a group, and that's it. It's at least quite possible that in a few months I will have someone in some seat somewhere who I have on speed dial, right? And I'm just speaking about myself as an example. I'm not some big string puller or whatever. But the fact is, we'll be at that point where within the institutions of power, as stifled as they may be, I will be able to, in a text, say, hey, here's an issue. Because years ago, there was Rory McKiernan on Twitter. There was Listún Varna being overwhelmed. There was this, that, and the other. And I was trying to speak to anyone in some position of authority or influence, and there was no one there. I'm completely blackballed and isolated. Whereas in not too... this is already the case in a sense, but officially in the political realm, I'll have people, and it'll be more and more people as time goes on, who I can, and people ask me if I'll run and all that, but just even putting that aside, let's say I never run, there will be a whole world of people within the official structures that I can just dial up and call and say blah, 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 chat away with. So that's a big coup in a sense of its own. And we're going to have that. My point being, we're going to have that sooner than in Britain, in England. And on top of that, not only will we have people in the right positions, but, and this is my whole gig, I'll talk about something else related to this in a second, but I've begged and pleaded over the years and fought desperately for a level of fluidity between the center-right, moderate, mediocre people, whether it's kind of gripped or whether it's some bourgeois kind of person on the fence, or, you know, you name it. I've always desperately wanted for the whole, and out to the furthest, most spurged out nationalist, you know, I've always wanted to maintain a certain level within reason of a spectrum that is clean between those things, where there's as little denunciation as possible in either direction, and there's as much solidarity between people, because the tendency among regimes in the West is to try to fracture that and throw it into disarray, because that of course weakens it and makes them more powerful. My goal has always been to try to, and it's impossible to do, and sometimes it's necessary to have issues and debates and enemies and all this kind of stuff, but as much as is possible to try to hold all those different things in and try to create, because Ireland is small, create enough human relationships and enough respect and enough one-to-oneing and enough, well, I like you as a person, so no matter who tells me to condemn you, I'm maybe not going to, because I've always thought you told the truth and you're decent enough. I've always wanted that energy there, and that exists currently, still exists against all odds in Ireland. It kind of exists among all the different little influencers in the right, or whatever you call it, in Ireland. There's a certain amount of human solidarity across the spectrum, and that's massive. That's huge. They don't really have that in England at all. You know, there's all these different factions everywhere, from all the different little parties and the Tories and whatever else. Again, it's an issue, but it's just, it's down to a minimum in Ireland as much as is possible, and that's a major strength of ours. Anyway, what's my point, I suppose? Oh yeah, is that we're so far ahead of England in that sense that maybe if we can translate that into sort of more and more influence and more power in various ways, that and then this is all fantasy, you know, it's all just a dream. it transfers into some sort of ability to actually police immigration in Ireland, to actually roll back the tide on that. If we can get, big if, but if we can get that going, what you're left with then is a Northern Irish population who are, yes, they're concerned, even the Catholics and the Republicans and stuff, they're concerned about, well, how's this going to impact on me economically and all of that. And then, of course, you have the million odd loyalists who are, chafing, understandably, they have a different identity and all that. But given that immigration starts to dominate everything because it has such an impact on our lives and makes our identitarian differences kind of shrink a little bit to some extent, it turns out that immigration restrictionism and nationalism in the immigration sense could be the salve for the north, for Ulster, for north of Ireland, the 6 counties, that makes it kind of almost an easy thing. Just hypothetically, if we got our batten down the hatches in the Republic in Ireland, jurisdictional Ireland, I mean, I think the north would be, all backgrounds of people would be a lot more happy to just jump in with the 32 county state if that were the case. So, and then from there you have an effective, territory to work with. Anyway, so yeah, so that was the Brussels angle. Back to the Burkean article. So the 6 and the Great Replacement. If you thought the emergence of nativist sentiment post-East Wall was wild, wait until the Northern Statelet with its lingering paramilitarism and splintering unionism. Never mind the fact that it is now an EU frontier after 2020 gets going. A dispute over an African mayor in Derry being parachuted in could just be starters for the decades ahead, when Belfast and Derry, already pre-existing sectarian machines, come into contact with the third world, potentially in transition towards an MI5 run shared Ireland, the new Ireland TM. Yeah, there's a massive collision course in play here that's got multiple angles going on, ethnic, geopolitical, and all of that. But I'll tell you now, and I've said this many times, I see some people saying, someone says Ihawa there, I hope you're not all abandoning me, but I know it's getting late and I've gone on, but there's a big ramble in me here, so I'm just going to keep going for those of you that are hanging out. So, I've actually spent quite a bit of time up in the 6 over the last few years, just because my wife and I, and over a few years, we went up there a lot, and kind of all over, really. And the big thing you notice, Newcastle County Down became a bit of a spot. We even brought Phil Dwyer up there once. He joined us for a bit of a mini holiday for a while. Phil's a mobile guy, he'll just show up any old time. We were happy to have him, as we always are. But yeah, we've been up to Newcastle multiple times. I've had my own mother come up and join us, and all this family who I speak about. Phil, I consider him family. Newcastle is a spot of ours. We love it, right? And Newcastle County Down, it's just got the Mourns. I was going to say Slieve League. Is it Slieve Donard? Nestled over you, and then the beauty of the ocean just underneath it, and it's such a lovely little town. And one of the things I've always said about it is that it's extremely homogenous. There might be, I think it's a majority Catholic Irish kind of place, but either way, if you consider it British Isles, we'll say, people or whatever, it's very homogenous. There's local little shops. It's not all Starbucks. It's not all this. It's not all that. And we went there when our kids were small, and everybody would stop and pinch the cheek and say hello and lovely day. And it was just weird because there wasn't this negative attitude that I believe is downstream of tyranny and forced integration and all of this in the south, in Ireland, we'll say, the Republic of Ireland. I don't want to offend anyone with my terminology here. Sometimes if you say the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland, just get over it, right? But it's shocking up there how, and I hope it's still the case, but how you get up there and you're blown away by the atmosphere up there. And I know it's different in Belfast because it's a big city, but in somewhere like Newcastle, the ambience is just so good up there. It's clean, everybody's friendly and cohesive, and there's a little bakery and all this kind of stuff. And there's, among a couple of thousand people, there's a smattering of a handful of foreigners. Like if you spend a week up there, you might see, I don't know, if you go out every day walking around, you might end up seeing like 5 or 6 visible, detectable foreigners. Really not a lot at all. Like, and families are out in the evening walking their dogs and at the park, and their kids are out late in the evening playing in the playground and all this. There's just this lovely atmosphere. And a lot of it has to do with the demoralization, the defeat, and a lot of it has to do with the immigration replacement in the South. You just don't get that vibe in most places down South at all. And I've always believed that it's the fact that you can be in Newcastle and have that, and then go down to Laytown or something, or Bettystown in County Louth. I'm pretty sure it's County Louth, or is it County Meath maybe, or down to the other side of things, and everything changes. Even Newry is a lot better than the likes of a Dundalk or Drogheda. It's remarkable, the difference. And so, just to speak to this article here, the idea, if you put immigration on steroids, the level it is under McEntee's Dublin or whatever, if you start pumping that into all corners of the 6 counties, I mean, I do believe that Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and East Wall and all that would look like nothing by comparison. So, as that point said, so Tory tactics. Regardless of how many GB news slots are offered, the Tory machine has zero interest in solving demographic replacement on either side of the border or in Britain. Just as in Carson's time, Ireland is a chip in the wider international power game by London elites, happy to placate the Brexit voting peasants with some cheap Daily Mail headlines as the country transforms into a Pakistani slum. Thinking that the Republic's hopelessly Anglophile political class is simply Brit bashing, a la John McGurk, doesn't cover the real issues at hand. London Mandarin seriously considered moving millions of Hong Kongers in the 1980s to the 6 counties to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and won't hesitate to direct tens of thousands of Afghans to Mount Street if it needs a polling boost. So yeah, that the Tory London government might start flooding up the north and all that, a la Lukashenko, Lithuania type of thing. So the national question, final point on their bullet points. The national question, this has and will continue to flourish in Féin, already grappling with populist electoral stirrings in the 26, and adds a roadblock to any path to a united Ireland of any description. A sane Republican platform needs border control, preferably in the Irish Sea, as a leading issue, with the Danish option as an easy outfit for any constitutional nationalist looking to outwit an as of yet immature nationalist right. So, I mean, well, I always, usually when I'm reading an article, here's a little trick for you. All due respect to people who write articles, including myself once in a while. If you're ever reading an article and you kind of couldn't be bothered, you just skip to the last 2 paragraphs, read those, and kind of, like, if it's a choice between nothing or that, then just read the last 2 paragraphs. Anyway, with that said, I will read the last 2 paragraphs. The North becoming a space of chaos in the migration wars is something that should keep both you and the Irish government up at night, regardless of your hostility to replacement migration. Amoral and jingoistic Tories playing around in Irish affairs is nothing new, but a Pandora's box kept in check since the 1990s has been opened as the North becomes a potential asylum dumping ground for UK elites. If you thought the East Belfast UDA was bad enough, imagine a prospective new Irish state post-reunification navigating Albanian and Afghan narco gangs. Aside from the institutionalized open border policies in Dublin and Brussels, let us not forget that the one word that poses arguably the biggest demographic threat in the long term after this week, partition. So yeah, I have a feeling who wrote this actually. I have my suspicions just by the tone and the narrative. But one of the things, just a point I want to make before I forget it about this is that everybody's talking about, potential hard borders in like County Downs, County Louth, whatever, Cavan, Fermanagh, all that, Donegal, Derry, etc. And it's like the idea of a hard border, and so you're doing it to stop like the Tories flooding Ireland. I think there's a bit of nonsense, but hypothetically, you're doing that to stop the Tories flooding Ireland with their, unwanted immigrants. And then that's going to spark troubles again in the north or whatever because of a hard border, the big scary hard border. And it's kind of like, the one question I have about that is that not just totally moot anyway? Because you can look at different statistics of, oh, so many are coming down from Belfast to Dublin, and that's a debate of its own between Micheál Martin and Helen McEntee and whatever. But like, I looked up earlier on Skyscanner. I was just looking at flights. I'll actually pull up the exact number for you, right? So I looked up on Skyscanner flights from, let's say, to take just examples of like big populations who come here for the asylum seeker issue. And bear in mind, the immigration question doesn't start and end with the asylum seeker issue. I mean, it's not a red herring, but I mean, it goes far beyond that. There's many Indians coming here on visas and all of this, tens of thousands. It goes beyond asylum, but that's the flashpoint. So we'll talk about that. I looked up Skyscanner, and so to take, let's say, from Tbilisi, Georgia, via, I think it stops in Munich, to Dublin, you can get a flight. I just picked the 4th of June one-way ticket, €238, right? And then from Algeria, from Algiers, the airport in Algiers, via one stopover to Dublin, you can get for €128. So €200, right? From those countries, a lot of people come to Ireland from Georgia and Algeria. They're two countries that aren't on any sort of refugee dangerous country list, but many of them come here. You can fly from there to here for a couple of £100, and a lot of people there who are coming have money, right? And what's potentially waiting for them, a free own door accommodation from Roderick O'Gorman, and the heat on full blast throughout the winter, and the food coming to you, and reunify with your 10 family members, and they all get houses too and all that. A flight for €100-200 is no big deal. And they can fly to Dublin for that money. And stop me if I'm missing something in the chat, by the way, but they can fly to Ireland on that ticket on a holiday. I don't know what the visa situation is. Do you have to get a temporary holiday visa? I don't know. But like, you can fly to North Korea on a 2-week holiday, right? You can fly to Iran, Russia, China, even countries that are a bit funny about guests arriving. Any country in the world you can fly to on the premise of a holiday, for sure, right? Including Ireland, most of all Ireland, right? Like any Western country, you can fly on a holiday. And in my view, I wouldn't really be against that. I mean, I'm a hardcore nationalist, hardcore immigration restrictionist, and yet I'll suggest a lot of things, but I would never really suggest that, well, should someone from any particular part of the world not be able to fly to Ireland on the premise of, I'm coming for a 2-week holiday, I'm booking a hotel, I'm going to enjoy the sights, I'm going to go see the Cliffs of Moher, and I'm going to go home with my family, and that's it. I've never suggested or even thought that that should be off the table. That's reasonable. Come on a holiday to Ireland. In fact, the more the better, right? Tourism. So, and again, stop me if am I missing a detail here? That when people talk about, oh, close the border, and Ireland's funny because we're on an island anyway, but it's kind of an American terminology I've always found. It's kind of close the borders. It's kind of like, is it really a question of a border? Whether that border is the customs section of Dublin, Cork, Shannon airports, or whether it's a guard standing on the side of a road in Blacklion or in just south of Newry or whatever. Is it really a question of border? Is it a question of barbed wire and guards and passport checks and all that? Or is it a question, when you come back to the fact that anyone, and I don't think any of us want any different situation, that anyone can fly to Ireland, land in Dublin, and they can get out of the airport. They can either go to the iPass centre or probably present in the airport, I don't know, and they can say the word, even if they don't speak any English, they can say the word asylum. I'm bisexual. I'm suffering political persecution. The NGO told me to say this and that and the other and whatever. Here are all the magic words. And now I have Cathal Malone, who's all over the TV telling us that there's nothing we can do about it and all that. And of course, he's working in the immigration industry, a very worthy source there. But, you'll have these so-called experts come on the TV and say, well, they have the right to asylum under not just the 1951 convention, but 500 million conventions since, and 5 million subsections that they're entitled to this and entitled to that, and 50 million appeals. I'm hashing out big hypothetical numbers here, but they can appeal and appeal and appeal, and they should get this free and they should get that free, and all of it. And it's rights. And we're here, an army of NGOs and international human rights organizations and immigration lawyers and multinational corporation and state-funded institutions who are just queuing up to protect the rights of this guy who just landed in the airport and arrived at the iPass center or whatever. And he's got all these rights, and all he has to do is just effectively say the word asylum. Asylum. I'm here to seek asylum. He could even have it on a note translated to say, here's my note. There you go. I'm just going to sit down in this fold-out chair here now and wait until something happens, because you're obliged. And the state is falling over itself to oblige itself. Now, how does a border, be it in County Louth or be it in Dublin Airport, become relevant to that? Because again, unless you want a border that is so tough and so stringent that it is barbed wire at the airport and no one can come through, then what's the point? I mean, anyone can get in here on a €100, €200 flight ticket and just say the magic words, and this whole institutional framework unfolds in front of them. So it's like, to me, the border question, close the borders, open the borders, the border in the north, the border in the airport, is sort of moot. It's like the border, the effective border, is the environment that exists within the country, throughout the country, and throughout the institutions and the governmental framework as regards immigration, asylum, and all of and the national question or whatever. That's kind of the important point. I'll just cut to the chase, right? So I have China here. China's my big hobby horse, right? And it's just the ultimate example. I don't talk about this all the time for no reason, right? But I still have a screen share in front of me. So I just looked up. I've a big article with sources on this if you want like detail and stuff, and you can find it yourself. But right now I'm just going to go with shorthand, casual, a bit of a Wikipedia, a bit of a Kiora post or whatever. This it's not Harvard referenced here, but it's like, we'll just take it at face value. So there's a thing asking here, like, so how would China deal with illegal immigration? And there's a bunch of people replying, talking about how basically, and I'm not advocating any of this. I'm just saying, if you try to run over a border, you could potentially be, I don't know if you'll quite be shot. Maybe it's possible. It's probably quite possible, but you definitely be detained. And there's a whole thing here talking about, and you can just look it up if you want to, but I mean, talking about various things they do for illegal immigration in China, because of course people will try to come across from Vietnam, they'll try to come across from North Korea, they'll fly in from, wherever, Papua New Guinea or something. Like, China is a relatively advanced place. It's got an ordered civilization and it's reasonably wealthy compared to a lot of other places. If they had the system we have, I'm not talking about borders, I just mean the national framework. I'm sure there's hundreds of millions of people in the world who would happily go there if they could get their hooks within China, exist, maybe get a free house, or even just get a job or just live there. They'd be like, I'd rather live here than in Papua New Guinea. I'd rather live in Shanghai, of course, So it's not like there isn't pull factors. The pull factors exist in spades in China, surely. And yet they don't have this issue, of course, at all. One of the points here is that they offer like 3,000 RMB. I don't know what the conversion is, but they offer rewards to people effectively for ratting out illegal immigrants or reporting on them. So not only, whereas in Ireland, if you did it, you'd probably get locked up, right, for even suggesting it, or you'd get a front page on the Irish Times and lose your job. Whereas over there, they reward people for reporting illegal immigration. They have all these other things they have, and like some people will roll in their pajamas thinking about this, but the idea of a digital surveillance state and all of that in China. Now, agree with that, disagree with it, it's a fact of life in China, and let's be real, it's a fact of life in the West as well. It's just the advent of technology leads to these things. speaking of Helen McEntee, she's introducing facial recognition in Ireland. That'll become ubiquitous and it won't need court warrants. Eventually, it'll just be ubiquitous and your face will get scanned and everything else, right? I mean, you might as well be fighting with the clouds if you think you're going to stop that from happening. It's just technology, good or bad. And they use that over there for stuff like this. So you have your WeChat and all of this, which is what you tap in order to get onto the train and the subway and to access your banking and all this kind of stuff. Again, like it or lump it, that's how it is. And that's how it's going to be, if not already somewhat the case in the West. And so if you're an illegal immigrant in China, if the guy up the next door to you who knows that you shouldn't be there, because it's easy to spot, obviously, if he's not reporting you and you're getting dragged off and politely escorted either into a dungeon or off to the, a flight out, and you're probably going to pay for it yourself in terms of fine. If it's not that, it's just the fact that you can't exist there. It's like technologically and administratively, if you wanted to make it so that the only people who are in the country are the ones who are meant to be in the country, whether it's through the panopticon digital surveillance state or whether it's through just giving rewards to people who report on illegal immigration, or whether you just empower the authorities, all of that, practically speaking, infrastructurally, it would be very easy to make it so that the state decides who is meant to be here and who isn't. And then the subsequent question is the enforcement. Okay, well, now you've decided who's meant to be here and who isn't. Now, are you able to get the people who aren't meant to be here out? Whether it's to carrot, stick, or in a sense, it's a lack of carrot, i.e. not giving people houses, not giving weekly dole or grants or any of that. All of this. So that's the carrot. And then the stick is to be like, okay, we're not giving you this stuff. And if for some reason you're still hanging on your own behalf or whatever, then the stick comes out, which is you're being dragged off to a prison. And it's not like a normal prison. It's a bit less than a normal prison. Or some facility near the airport, just some holding facility. And you're going to be either deported. And then if there's this big international rigmarole of like, well, did you come via France or London or where did you come from? You're kind of lying. It'll just be brought to the point where, and I'm just riffing here, it'll just be brought to the point where it's like, well, ideally you would just go where you came from or just leave, or you would help us to help you to just go. But if you really don't want to do that, we'll bring it to the point where you will gladly leave, via, and again, I'm not talking about inhumane sort of, some people might disagree, but under the circumstances, but I'm not talking about like, and in China, they might even beat, torture and shoot you and all this stuff. I don't know. But let's just put that aside. Even short of that, you just say, listen, there's nothing here for you. We're not offering you goodies, and we're offering you basically being put in a cell, and you're not getting like a Xbox and whatever. Like, it's not like, however much we need to turn the dial to get you to the point where you, if you're not going to tell us where you're actually from and just go, or if there's international consternation, we're going to make it so that it's not our problem, it's your problem. You can stay in the conditions that we're offering you, such as they are, or like any rational person reacting to stimuli, you will just get up and be like, I'm out of here. I don't want to be here. There's nothing here for me. I have no rights. I can't work. I'm not being given anything for free. I'm just in some cell somewhere. And now bear in mind, this is not imprisoning immigrants left, right, and center in some jolly kind of fashion. This is after you've said, in the manner of a polite modern state, after you've said, your visa is up, sir. You're not meant to be here. You came on the premise of a holiday. You've applied for some kind of asylum. We've told you that we're not just rejecting the application, but we're rejecting your right to even begin an application. You're not coming here now, and because you've came on this premise, you're subsequently barred from the country, right? You've effectively committed crimes here, and so, sir, without offering you any bad condition or without putting you in any bad spot at all or oppressing you in any way, we're asking you now as a sovereign people and a sovereign nation to go, please. And so anything further to that would be subsequent to that. It's like, So it's not something of you're hunting people down, you're putting people in a bad position because you want to or because that's your first move. It's just you've been asked politely by legal authorities to go, and now you haven't, and now conditions are just going to get worse for you. The law is going to be applied to you, and inevitably, under that sort of scenario, you're just going to go. And in terms of paying for your flight, you're going to have to either, before you do get to go now, you're going to have to pay the fine, you're going to have to pay for the flight, you're going to have to pay for everything, and you're going to have to pay extra. And until then, enjoy your conditions and that kind of thing. That's what they do in any country when they want to stop illegal immigration. First, you have to decide what is legal immigration. First, you decide that is under tight margins, and then from there, it's what about, because there's this whole head scratching from McEntee and all these people of what do we do about all this. It's like you just do what you have to do so that you get to a point where you're like China, where people who want to come to your country to go on a holiday come and they understand the situation. As far as I'm aware, if you go to China, you want to see the port of Shanghai and you want to see the antiquities and all of that, you go to China. You don't have to, it's not crazy, it's not obsessive, but you go there full in the knowledge that I am under the sovereignty of this country, this people, and the authorities in this country. And when I'm finished, I'm going to go. And if I don't, I'm probably going to end up in some form of jail or incarceration, and it's not going to be good. And they're probably going to require a big, massive fine for me to go before I do go. And if I do that, and it's like, it's not unreasonable. If I do that, then I'm going to tell all my friends, any other industry or institution that's going to be trying that will. I mean, you're going to tell your friends basically, yeah, don't go there. I mean, go there on a holiday, but don't go there to take the piss. It doesn't work at all. That's really what it comes down to. Whereas in Ireland, we have the complete opposite of that. They get to access this UBI on steroids kind of state environment that Irish people don't get to enjoy. And right now we see they were ferried from Mount Street in Dublin city centre out to, it's debatable, but out to Newtown, Mount Kennedy, Crooksling, or City West. And of course, a lot of them, for the second time, have made their way back to the outside of the IPAS centre. Now, one can only conclude that the only reason they're coming back to live in shitty tents and all of that is either some sort of drug racket or I don't know what, or more likely, they're coming back in order because they have some sort of idea in their heads, which is probably based on, I mean, again, these are rational actors, these people. They probably know that there's some game out there where if I hang around long enough and I keep coming back like a homing pigeon or something, no matter where they bring me to, the authorities will just fold and they'll say, just put them in one of the houses. You know, we have some houses built with no planning permission out in Wicklow. So while we're persecuting Sean in Tipperary, Sean Meehan will just put him into one of the new build houses. It's BRA2. It's warm. He'll get in there. He'll be straight on the dole, straight into the dentist. He'll go into the dentist just to get a teeth cleaning, you know. And he'll basically score. Like once you get on the system, on the track, once you're in the house and you have the medical card and you have to this and you have to that, they don't want to go down tent road where they're shipped from one tent to the other and they'll probably still end up in a house, but they know that if they just hang around outside the IPAS, they'll maybe eventually just be satiated or given what they want and straight into the house. But of course, once they go, there'll be another, because it's like trying to clear water out of a boat with a big massive hole in it. It's just, it doesn't make any sense because there'll be more there. In fact, there'll be twice as many will refill once you do that. Now, of course, that's Roderick O'Gorman and Helen McEntee and Micheál Martin dealing with it. But of course, if I were dealing with it and you were dealing with it, we would just do the common sense thing. We'd go down the China approach, which is like, okay, first in legislatively, the immigration thing, speaking specifically about the asylum, I've actually gotten to the point, because people talk about legitimate asylum seekers, I've gotten to the point where I think it's more than reasonable. I could do an argument on this, I won't blab on. I think it's more than reasonable that basically we're at the point where so much has been done already and so much oversubscription has happened that the idea of going back to a moderated or a more controlled asylum and immigration system, I think we're just past that. The chaos is too much now, and the pressures are too much, that, and so much wrong has occurred, that the only reasonable solution at this point, in my view, is to take the entire asylum concept, whether it's the 1951 convention or the Dublin Convention, or pack it all into one big box, take the box and drop kick it into the river. It's has to be over. No more asylum. We have in Ireland, we have more immigrants in Ireland than China has, not per capita, but full stop. China has more billionaires than it has refugees. I think it's a couple of hundred refugees, right? Debatably, but they have very, very little, if any. And Ireland has hundreds of thousands, all illegitimate in my view, right? Even the Ukraine ones, they could just go to the other side of Ukraine and live there if they really wanted to. Or they could just resolve this unnecessary war, and but the whole asylum thing just needs to go out the window. The concept is ridiculous. The whole idea that let's check the passports at the airport and let's take a few countries, put a few more countries on the safe country list. Listen, the time for that was 20 years ago. We've had hundreds of thousands of Georgians and Albanians and all this come in here. They shouldn't be here. They need to go home. And more are coming every day. The asylum concept was meant to be for a person who is getting tortured into oblivion in Sudan so that they can go into the neighboring country and be entitled to food and water and shelter in whatever the neighboring country is, if they're in Somalia to Ethiopia or whatever, and that they could maybe be given some basic human care before being returned expeditiously to their origin country. It was never meant to be, or at least any unreasonable understanding, it was never meant to be that someone from Nigeria with no major conflict happening flies to Ireland and tries to get a free house and camps outside things and has all these immigration lawyers and extra rights that Irish people could never dream of having, and Ukrainians with Porsche Cayennes who get a €400,000 free house. Meanwhile, someone who's on the absolute poverty line in Ireland, but they're working, can't get anything, regardless of means, regardless of the safety you were in originally. It's like that. So you can't reason with a system like that. It just needs to go. You just need to say asylum was a ridiculous concept for 70 years. I mean, asylum has existed in some basic human fashion for eternity. It's always existed, the idea of helping people or something, neighborly assistance. But this modern concept of asylum, this kind of black letter international law asylum thing, it has to go. China doesn't practice it. Singapore doesn't practice it. Cuba doesn't practice it. Bhutan doesn't practice it. Indonesia, and all these countries, there might be minor exceptions, but Indonesia basically doesn't practice it. India, many countries in the world. Micheál Martin recently said, I think maybe today, said that this is a global issue. I mean, I'm silly to even address people like these. They're just liars. But he said the premise is that, this is a global issue. It's to do with war. It's to do with strife. We need to solve the war in the origin countries. And this is a global issue affecting the whole world and all this. And of course, he never has to deal with any opposition like me speaking back to him. But the obvious point is to just say, whoa, hold on a second now, Taoiseach. It's not in China. China's 1.5 billion people. It's not in India. India's about the same. There's dozens and dozens of other countries around the world who may or may not be signed up to these protocols. If they are, it's in by name only anyway, because they just enforce their own country or their own laws as they please, which they should. So it's not a global issue. It's a Western issue. Western countries, which are at this point, 1.5 billion, maybe less of the global population, they're minority, peripheral, ethnic and national bloc within the international community. And we're the only ones doing this thing. So it's not global at all. That's nonsense. So piss off with it. And so the only answer is to either maybe stay in the treaties and just completely withdraw in practice, or just remove. It doesn't matter. To me, it's completely moot. It's like, no, it's just the fact that you just go, we're not doing that anymore. a Nigerian who shows up and claims asylum, or even if there's a war, let's say there's a war in, let's pick somewhere obscure now. Let's say there's a war in Guyana. Guyana and Venezuela get into a big war, and you have hundreds of thousands of Guyanese, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, refugees. And let's say the whole country is engulfed in war, and it's as legitimate as some people could imagine. There's genuinely a war. What's that got to do with Ireland? Go away, go away, go away, go away. If there's a war between Scotland and Wales, we'll take a couple of thousand of them, right? And for a year, and then they go home. But that's got nothing to do with the current situation. It's so no, anyway, to cut a long story short, just out of the asylum thing. The asylum thing is nonsense. And also, as I referred to earlier, if the multinationals want to pull on that basis, then my view, and some people say, oh well, we would be in we would end up in Transnistrian levels of, you know, backwardness or something like that. My view is just to be honest with people and just cut to the chase, which is just to say, I don't know what the consequences of multinationals pulling would be. And they might be difficult. They might be fraught. Would we need to rejig our economy domestically to cater to it? Would we need to go back to a more intergenerational household? There'd certainly be lots of property spare, so that if times got tough in one sense, at least there'd be a lot of asylum centres that are kitted out in modern insulation and all that, and the plumbing all done and everything. So there'd be no shortage. One of the things is that, oh, well, say there's unemployment or there's some other externality occurs from that. Well, we'd certainly all have a place to live anyway. Because if we were to cut the immigration and throw all the people who aren't meant to be here home, certainly everyone would just be walking into a property effectively for pittance. And you could say, well, you know, that's a big macroeconomic question. But the point is, we'd all have roofs over our heads, and there's land there to be tilled and farmed as it is being done. And there's plenty fish in the sea, literally. And over time, gradually, as one more multinational pulls, we develop domestic industry and we just face the music, right? It's kind of like that thing of some abusive partner or some abusive friend who keeps robbing you. And the condition is that, well, if I tell that person that they're not meant to come in and assault me and they're not meant to rob everything I have and tell me that I have no rights in my own home, if I tell them that they can't do that to me anymore, then they're just going to leave or something. And I think at least I imagine that their company is essential to me. It's kind of one of those basic things of like, if that's the case, if they're willing to pull for that, if they're manufacturing Intel computer chips or Apple computers or Viagra in Cork or whatever it is, if they feel like that they aren't in a comfortable environment to produce those things, and of course, cutting immigration drastically wouldn't even begin to affect their basic need for a workforce. But if doing something within our own sovereignty, and bear in mind these companies will do a lot of manufacturing in China, aforementioned China, and not bat an eyelid. So if they're willing to turn around uniquely for us and say that you introducing policies that probably pale in comparison to China or India or most other countries where we do manufacturing, but when you specifically do it, a half of what they do, it's intolerable and we have to pull. I think the obvious answer is that ideally they wouldn't keep manufacturing. It's wonderful, keep doing the business or whatever. But if we're at some kind of crux in the road, or it's the kind of fork in the road where you're telling me that you have to pull if we introduce basic sovereignty measures that most other countries in the world take as standard and as basic. If you're telling me that you need to pull for that, then I suppose you're probably better off pulling. I think that's probably how it is. And if the EU say, well, we're going to put so many sanctions on you for introducing, again, not policies where you're going around chasing foreigners for the crack and then all this, but you're just saying, we just want what China has and what Indonesia, India, Bhutan, Cuba, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, all these countries have. We're talking about international community here, right? We just want what is the case for the majority of the world and throughout history. If the EU want to sanction us, and they get to a point where they basically say we're going to sanction you to death within the bloc or force you effectively to leave, constructive dismissal. Again, I'm not necessarily hung up on leaving the EU. A lot of people like the EU, But it's kind of one of those things where you go, well, if you're going to insist on abuse or membership, I suppose we'll have to leave. And my answer to the EU is also, we signed up to a common trade area and a common travel area over time. The deal was that someone from Italy can come here and work a job, and we can go to Spain and pick fruit and work there and live it up in Barcelona and work hard, and we'll have a shared international or a shared European community. That's okay on paper, actually. But the deal was a radical suggestion that we have a visa-free common travel area and a common labor market. That was a radical position. If I were introducing that position to a whole territory, I would be saying, well, we've done a big thing here. We better not do anything else crazy for hundreds of years, at least, because that's actually a big project and will take centuries effectively to normalize and to harmonize. And what did they do? Within basically immediately, in the case of Germany and the UK and others, the first thing was to open up the external border. So you had the Turkish in Germany in the 50s, and so on and so on. And they got around to Ireland in the 90s and 2000s eventually. But the part of the common travel area was never, the common travel area had an external border and then internal borders that everybody agreed to some fashion or another to remove. It was never part of the agreement that you take the external borders off on top of that to the whole world, radically different cultures, a limitless labor pool who can come in. So it was already radical enough to think, well, an Italian or a Dane or a Spanish or anything else, depending on how their economy is that day, can come here and sort of fill gaps in our labor market, and that'll sort of empower Gombeans and industry a bit more, and it'll disempower labor. But I suppose if the labor pool is stuck within Europe, there's only so much to go around, and so eventually it'll kind of settle, I suppose, to some extent. And because of the currency, it'll also settle that way eventually, and it'll just become sort of equitable eventually. But you pull the borders off for Bangladesh and Nigeria as well, that goes totally off the wall. And so the idea that basically if you just reassert basic sovereignty and multinationals in Europe don't like it, I think it's one of those things where you go, it's unfortunate. I'd rather just get along. But if that's intolerable to you, then the alternative, like I said earlier in a different context, the alternative is worse. Do you want to just go along with that forever under the circumstances we have now with Newtown, McEntee and pepper spray and impoverishment and second-class citizenship and complete disempowerment and rule by comprador elite who hate you and want to throw you in jail and all the rest of it, right? And getting increasingly worse, that no matter how normal you are, no matter how unradical you are, no matter how much you want to just hide away from it, you cannot get away from it. It gets worse and worse and worse. So you're at the point where you have to kind of, like, all these bullets that have to be bit, whether again through multinationals or with London or with Brussels or with what might be currently be perceived as draconian policy where you freeze people out. It all has to be done. And to me, it's like, it's a nightmare and it's a headache, but it's like what is required is what's necessary, and the alternative is effectively worse, as we see. But anyway, so I rambled, and one more thing I want to mention, lads. One more. Can I ask you in the chat there? Can I do one more thing, or am I just going on a bit? Let me know. Let me know, because I know they say it's good to keep a show short and whatever, but So someone end of the line Joel says continue. I'll take that as a vote. Okay, so just one more thing. It's just regarding can I find it? No, of course not. So it was Jana London. She was at, I'll put the screen share back up. She was at Newtown McEntee, I believe, today. I'm not sure. But she went up to the guards and she gave a spiel to them. Do you remember your oath and all of this kind of stuff? And people could say, like, she did a good job, going. And also, by the way, I have so much respect for anyone who goes down there. I criticized recently Niall Boylan, who's all right. Niall Boylan's all right. But I criticize him to a point, and I criticize definitely Pater Tobin, who's maybe less all right. But some of these people I criticized them for it's kind of not being in Newtown McKennedy. Where are you, right? I'm just another pauper like anyone else, right? And I'm putting petrol in my old car, and I'm going halfway across the country to arrive at Newtown Mount Kennedy. Phil's already streaming, so I didn't bother streaming. That's not what mattered to me. There's no point doubling up anyway on streams, but regardless, I kind of just thought I'm kind of not here. I don't feel like it's a failed venture because I'm not getting numbers or something. I'm here, and I'm not going to draw any major attention. I couldn't be bothered making videos. I'm here because I feel like it's important to show up at a time like this. I don't want to look back on Newtown Mount Kennedy and say that I didn't go. I just want to go, walk along with the people, have a couple of chats, and in the fullness of time, I can say, I don't know, I maybe didn't do that much, but I went. You don't go to everything, but when things like this happen, they matter. So I see Jana London, she went. That's wonderful that she went, and she did a little kind of video up with the guards, and I have points to make on this in general, but I'm not going to go through it all, right? But she's just a very, I'm such a big fan of people I love within the general dissident space in Ireland. I've never met her, by the way, at all, but there's some people I really respect and admire. She's one of them, and just the fact that she went. So I believe she's from somewhere like in Meath. She talks about Tara and all that. She's around that area. So a spin down from Meath to there probably takes an hour, right? So anyway,
concerned about their community, their families. Village are concerned about their community, their families, their women and children by having people stand up and ask questions.
but I'm just kind of.
I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing my job and taking orders. That's not going to be good enough anymore. I can understand the anger from these people here. Doing your job isn't the answer, and it's not good enough. Your job is to serve the people and protect the life and the property of people, all people, as you said. That includes Irish people.
So one of the things was that the guard tried to kind of get smart with her. So some of the guards just sit there silently, and one of these guys, the guy on the right here, he came up to her and he said, she was kind of trying to go do gotchas with him, and he was trying to, it was like a little rhetorical battle. She's saying, here's your oath, and your oath is to not be part of a secret society. And he's saying, well, I'm not part of a secretive society or a political party. I just followed orders from the superintendent in Bray. I'm just summing it up for you here. I'm just following orders from the superintendent in Bray, so that's not a secret society. That's part of the legitimate Garda hierarchy. So your point is kind of wrong there. I'm just following orders. I am just following orders, but in terms of being part of some nefarious thing, I'm just following orders from the internal Garda structure. So technically speaking, I'm not doing anything wrong, according to your own logic. This is within the Garda thing, and ultimately he says, our basic mandate is to protect life and to protect property. And again, on paper, you kind of go, well, I suppose that's fair enough, isn't it? To protect life and to protect property. I mean, if you were to try and sum down the Garda thing, some nationalists would say it's to stand up for your people and all that. But I mean, I'll give the devil its due. He could argue, well, no. I mean, you could. What's the root essence of An Garda Síochána? Maybe, as the name suggests, it's to keep peace, maybe. And then fundamentally, if you're protecting one thing from another thing or competing interests, I suppose the basic fundamental root would be life and property. And most people would, on paper, agree with that. To protect life, obviously, as someone coming up and trying to hit you with a crowbar or whatever, what do? You call the guards or whatever. Defend yourself, but call the guards is what they exist for. This man's attacking me. He's violent to protect my life. Call the guards. And someone's smashing in your windows. It's my property. Either I go out on a blood feud with this person, or I call the guards, which is what they're there for, to prevent blood feuds and the rest of it. And so fundamentally, it's about protecting life and protecting property. Now, this is like Jana is trying to kind of get pull a stunt on him, and he's trying to pull a stunt on her, and it's a little debate about like rhetoric and stuff. But it's kind of like, you can whittle it down and boil it down as philosophically as you want, but and I kind of almost say fair play to the guard for engaging in a way, like regardless of how you feel about it. But it's kind of like, and it's not the business of us to have to debate guards. Is kind of preposterous as well. But like at the end of the day, and she does a good job here because she says you're protecting the lives and property of or the property of that property up there, arguably. But what about the property and the lives of the people on the other side? As you can see in the video there, the barrier side of the barrier she's on, which is the town. The town now are walled out from this area. What about their property? What about our lives? And of course, he dismisses that and says, "I know I'm just talking over it," rather than watch the whole video. But it's kind of like she does make a good point. She eventually arrives at kind of the crux, I suppose, in a way. What about the life and the property of the people on this side of the barrier, the entire townspeople here, who feel that their life and their property is under threat from what's potentially being installed above the road in the center? And of course, he kind of fobs that off. He says, well, we protect the life and the property of all people, whether it's the people in that center or the people in the town. If people in the town, their property or lives are threatened, we will just be there for them just as well. And all that. So it's a bit of a round and around in circles, but it's kind of the funny thing is, and someone mentioned this in the comments, is that she said, well, there's these single unvetted males. That's a bit of a meme, bit of a mantra. She said, these single unvetted males up there, you're effectively protecting their presence being forced on the community. And he said, people are so funny the way they always debate, and it's kind of debates are always chaotic, but he says, well, how do you know they're single? And she says, well, I don't know they're single. Well, it's funny, someone mentioned in the comments that when she said single unvetted males, he honed in on the single. So that's the nature of debate, is that you pick the weak spot instinctually. And he picked up on that, and she kind of kind of just accepted that and kind of moved on. She made some good points, but he picked on the aspect of singleness, whether they're single or not. And I suppose the answer to that is to say, well, I suppose I don't quite know if they're single or not. But he didn't pick up on, and this is the revelatory bit, he didn't pick up on the unvetted bit, because, of course, anyone who knows their facts knows that he can't qualm that aspect. They are unvetted. They're fundamentally unvettable. Unvettable, not just unvetted, but unvettable. You can't know who these people are. The selection process for these people indicates that they're ruthless, that they're opportunistic, that it cannot be known where they're from. Their cultures are totally alien, and they are young men between the ages of 18 probably and 35 or 40. So that's fundamentally dangerous when you don't know who these people are, especially when they come in volumes of hundreds into a small town, etc. He focused on the single aspect. He didn't focus on the bit that the unvetted bit, which is a fact. And it's just kind of like you can make your argument about life and property and about whether they're single or not, but at the end of the day, you're and I don't want to use the C word, C-U-N-T word, but you're the C-U-N-T, the lad. You're the lad, we'll say a better word. You're the lad who's standing there behind a metal barrier within a small rural community, defending, and yes, you are defending property. You're defending the property of some gombeen asshole who has no connection to the area, who is just there to make millions from taxpayer money in a state contract, a lucrative state contract that people like Jana and me and you and the people of Newtown Mount Kennedy are forced to pay for against their will, against the wishes of 80%, not really 80%, but everyone in the country, and the consensus in the country against this. So it's like, I don't really think it's the property in the there goes the whiskey, but I'll have to move on to the coffee now. But I don't think it's property in the sense of well, there's a person living, and this is the problem with property rights and the discussion about all of that. It's not like that guy whoever owns this, right? People in Newtown Mount Kennedy will know well. It's not like it's the property he lives in, his family live in there and whatever, or it's even a subsequent holiday home where he has one home, but then he's lucky enough to have a second one where he goes 2 weeks every year to chill out and whatever. He would be entitled, either the former or the latter, to that property and to protection, surely. Well, this is a different scenario, isn't it? You could have someone from China and hypothetically buy up that property and flip it for way more than they bought it for a state contract, and then hire someone else to do the running of it and all of that. and it's completely against the will of all people in the country and the local community, and somehow you're invoking private property rights there. It's kind of nonsense. By the way, Dave Cullen, computing forever, he had his house targeted by political violence and abuse and vandalism years ago, and the guards did nothing about that. I mean, they came down and they visited and they said whatever to him, but nothing was really done about that. There certainly weren't metal barricades, and I'm sure they have secret cameras everywhere and infrared on helicopters and panopticon surveillance and dozens, hundreds of guards pepper spraying and beating people. So they can do that for some sort of multimillionaire cunt, right? They can do it for that, but they can't do it for ordinary people, right? So when Joseph Puska is cycling around on his bike for years on end, doing nothing in his private property paid for by the state, stalking girls like Aisling Murphy, eventually to murder her in a bush. Well, you know, her life and her property was just forfeit. It was whatever. The life of Aoife Johnson in the hospital. That wasn't a Garda issue, but again, her life was completely thrown down the drain unnecessarily because of the same pressures. Because, of course, ultimately, if you bring in hundreds and hundreds of people into a town, you're doing it in the next town and the next town, next town. It adds up to thousands and hundreds of thousands, and your hospitals don't function anymore. In Lisdoonvarna, which is in the catchment area for the University Hospital Limerick, where this happened, they are now a third of their own population. Now, I went there in 2017, 18, whatever it was, to try and help these people in some small way, to no avail ultimately. But that was a basically homogenous town, or close to it, and now they're less than a third of the population there, and their people are all old, and the other 2/3 of people who are there are young and foreign and different and ascendant and all of this. And of course, that's 3 times or twice or 3 times the population. And where are they all going for their medical treatment willy-nilly? Into Limerick University Hospital. So again, the whole question of life and the question of property. What about the life and the property of the people in East Wall who don't want these people walking around like this? What about the life and the property of people in Ruski, all over the country, that they say, I want my property. I paid a couple of $100,000 for my house. I'm on the hook for a mortgage. I came to Newtown Mount Kennedy to bring it back here. I came here to get out of Dublin. I came here to get away from the city. There's quite a bit of new builds going on in Newtown Mount Kennedy. I thought, I'm going to grab one of them. I'm going to spend 350 grand on the mortgage. Ultimately pay closer to 550 probably or more in interest. I'll be on the hook for it for my whole life for this small little box. Because what I want is not just the 4 walls around me, but I want a nice country road, and I want peace, and I'm willing to drive 40 minutes into work. And that's all I want. I want this property, but the property comes with the environment, the nation, the country, the community, the roads, everything. It comes with that. And ultimately, more than anything, I want harmony and safety for my children to roam and play as they please, and to have a rough idea, even though I don't know everyone that lives there, we have a rough idea of the tone and the flavor within the community. And most people are nice, and there's a couple of dodgy people, but we know who they are, right? Now we have a couple of hundred men from Algeria and here and there. And not only that, but they're there. But of course, on any given week, 50 of them could be moved out and put into their new houses, either in Newtown, Mount Kennedy or elsewhere, and another 50 could be shipped in, which is what a lot of people don't understand about this system. If a centre goes in, it's not going to be let's say the centre has 250 people capacity, right? It's not just going to be a static 250 people. Like, they go in there, there's some good, there's some bad. You get to know them, and they just mill around in the community up and down from that centre forever. And eventually, I suppose you become somewhat maybe familiar with who's there, good and bad. It's not like that. It's a constantly cycling system that will be more of an institution or facility that is cyclical. It's always running in new people through this mill system. And so there are people who will be in that center in, let's say, 4 years' time, who, as it stands, they're somewhere in Morocco. And if you go to them and you say, have you heard of Ireland? They would say, I haven't. I'm not actually familiar with that country. But in 4 years' time, they will be in Newtown Mount Kennedy. As in, like, if you get what I'm saying, as in, there's people who haven't even considered coming here yet, who will be in there in time to come. So because it cycles. And so how are you meant to have a community with this revolving door institution up the road where men, for the majority, yes, unvetted, and yes, most often single, are being cycled through there constantly? How are you meant to go for a walk around there? Where's your life? Where's your property? The dignity, the protection, the safety, the surrounding environment of your property, which is why you buy a property and you live anywhere. Where is that for you? The guards aren't there. The barrier only works in one direction. When these lads are roaming around Newtown, Mount Kennedy, right, looking, not all of them and all that, but, you know, a girl on a jog or whatever it is, right? Are the guards going to be there with their infrareds and their helicopters and their barriers and their batons and their pepper spray? No, you'll ring them and they'll show up 4 hours later. So, you know, it's a bit rich for this guard with his shite to talk like that to such a estimable woman as Jana London. I don't know. But yeah, so anyway, I maybe should play this video slightly more.
That doesn't just include those single men being dumped in that field. So I can understand. I don't live here. I live an hour away. I drove up here to have a chat. I understand the anger and the fear and the concern that these people in this village have. Because nobody, not the Garda Síochána, not O'Gorman, not McEntee, not Drew Harris, none of them are protecting the people and the life and property of the Irish. They're just doing their job. So who's giving these orders? Don't think it's coming from anyone Irish. But you won't be forgotten now. You won't be forgotten that you're just doing your job. But by doing that, you are traitors to the Irish people. You are traitors to the Irish people by doing your job.
She's so right. She's so right. And they're just doing their job and they have a mortgage to pay and all that. But I just don't think it's any excuse. I've sacrificed a lot to do what I do. I'm sure some of you might be the same way. If I was in a job paying a mortgage and all that stuff, you know, as a guard, I think I would find my way out, find my way to the nearest exit if I had to. And the thing is, a lot of guards are leaving as well. So, you know, I don't know, we'll see where that goes. So one more point as regards Jana London. I talk about China a lot. I seem to bring her up a bit too, and various like hobby horses. But one of the things as well is that I was very relieved recently to see that she spoke recently at the Countess event, which is Leisha de Bruyne and some others. At this event, this is a side point here, and I'll wrap it up then. But she spoke at an event. Do I have the post? No, I've lost it, of course. Probably, yeah. So let me unshare my screen here for a sec. So this was an event about like the trans issue, TERFs and all this, trans like indoctrination in schools or whatever. And I should be able to find it. But there was, this might seem sort of obscure, but it's actually relevant. So there was this this event was happening, and like I always talk about, the spectrum across like the dissident right in Ireland, we'll say, goes from like the institutional to this to that to gripped to who you name it, right? And all the other independent YouTubers and stuff. And there's this kind of spectrum there. And I've often said before that Jana London is sort of like the epitome of the fault line within that tension. She's very respectable, very estimable, and people in the mainstream institutional right, whether it's the Free Speech Ireland events or whether it's the Countess thing or Gripped or any of that, they like her. She's got that appeal, she's got that gravitas and whatever. And yet, on the other hand, she's not willing to cut the cord to the unwashed, the sort of the riffraff or whatever, the buccal donna out there. She's not willing to do that. So some of them will cut the cord and kind of betray the person next to them for the expediency to get into the event, to be part of the insider club or whatever. And she is unwilling to do that. She believes what she believes. She associates with who she associates with, and that's it. And you can tell she's got integrity in spades, and that's it. And yet she maintains her respectability and everything else. So fair play. But I've always known that like the knives were going to be out for her constantly. And if they weren't out already, they would be out over the course of time, in the fullness of time. and this was the first kind of opening salvo I had seen, which was this account. I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but it's called Not All Gays in Ireland. It's this kind of a bisexual gay group that is against the trans agenda or whatever, but effectively really liberal type of people, except for the trans thing. And they came out with this big thing where it was hard to even wrap the head around. They said that we can't actually attend the event. We were invited, but we're disappointed to say we can't go because Jana London's going to be there. And she previously hung out with Andy Heisman and all these other people. And because those lads are against like asylum centers, strongly against asylum centers, and something they once said could be interpreted a certain way or whatever it is, and because they went into libraries and opposed transgender propaganda for children, because of all that, we can't go to the event, because if she's going to be there, maybe they're going to be there, and they are dangerous men that I feel uncomfortable around, and so I can't go. Which, of course, implicit in that is to say that, well, I would go. And by the way, it wasn't that Andy Heisman or anyone else character you can think of was due to speak at the event or even attend the event. It was that Jana London was there. So basically this chain of guilt by association. So she is tainted with them because she's going to be there. The event is tainted by her. And so she is the fault line, and she is the target point where, and I'm sure I'm just speculating, but I assume that they had contacted the organizers, and there were a couple of other little rats who were meant to attend or part of this little, this, and all due respect to Alicia de Bruyne and the Countess, but it's kind of it's meant to be the respectable end of things, we'll say, and it's a bona fide event and stuff. Well, we're going to target her as the fault line. So like, you either get rid of her, I'm assuming, get rid of her, or we're going to kick up fuss, which is, again, that's just such a toxic attitude. Of course, do any of us really believe that this person felt like they were unsafe to attend an event? This is just the liberal, call it cancel culture type of stuff. It's like, if you really cared about your issue about the trans stuff, you would accept that there's people there who you don't agree with from all walks of life, left, right, up and down. You would just attend the event and get on with people you get on with and ignore people you don't, and whatever, just like anybody else should. That's actually basically a power move to try to put the laser on Jana London and try to blacklist her from the event by a kind of basically a catty political sort of power move. And I don't want there to be any time for that kind of stuff. And of course, the event held on, and Jana spoke at the event, and that person cancelled and left and didn't attend, and as is their right. But it's that's in a way that's like the political front line is a thing like that. And there was someone, Colette Colfer, this kind of like person who thinks of them, she thinks she's like a Jordan Peterson of like the Ireland or whatever. She was coming out with this nonsense about, I think people there were against including her because of the style of her protests in libraries, supporting protests at politicians' homes, and also some of the men who've been associated with her, ? She says she's one of these people who like constantly appeals to bourgeois kind of respectability or something like that while trying to be Jordan Peterson. But again, with the snaky little attitude, I don't know this woman, but she says, I think people were against it, as if it's people, not me. She doesn't have the balls to say, I was against including her because of the style. And later on in the thread, she says, I never said I was against it. I'm saying I think that's what other people thought. So of course you had voices like her and others probably behind the scenes who had this kind of daggers out for Jana London and would rather her not be there and all this kind of stuff. Because of course the game is if you can cut her out of that event, you're effectively blacklisting her. She wasn't welcome at that, so maybe she's not really welcome at the subsequent ones. And now she is pushed into the margins with the riffraff and the streamers and the people who, tell the truth no matter what and have no sort of, they're not bound by like this kind of liberal respectability thing and stuff. And so if we can just sort of create a cordon sanitaire and put her over there and kind of establish that dynamic, then that's what we'll do. Like, I have no doubt that kind of stuff, in my speculative opinion, is sort of arranged behind the scenes to create this thing. And anyway, moral of the story is that so many people came out to say, do you know what, fuck you with your cancel culture kind of stuff. And she gave a great speech at the event, and that other person cancelled, and so be it. But it's just like, it might seem trivial or whatever, but these kind of things matter. And you can be sure that it was her showing up at Newtown Mount Kennedy to speak up for Irish people, like totally disempowered Irish people. Like, Jana seems well-to-do and respectable and all that. She went out of her way to go down to confront these guards and speak to them. And you can tell they respected her gravitas in a way as well, right? And she was willing to use her cachet in that sense for the people of Newtown Mount Kennedy, while some of the people I mentioned a while ago aren't willing to go down. They don't want to dirty. They'll run for election and they'll play the game and all that, but they wouldn't be seen down there. You know, it's a bit too naff or whatever. It's a bit too radical. It's a bit too charged. Or maybe they were afraid to be confronted by another streamer or whatever, because there are certain things that they aren't willing to say. She's willing to go down there and stand with the people like that. And this turf, not all gays Ireland person wouldn't care, right? They say that probably to oppose asylum centres is like wrong and all this stuff. You know, and again, it's just like, I'm not opposed to anyone being involved in any scene, but I would never go to an event and say, you know, take your, I mean, you name your NGO activist in Ireland, Antifa, sleuth, horrible person. If they were due to speak at an event that I was due to speak at and I agreed with the overall thing, I would say, I mean, let them be there. Maybe I'll speak to them or confront them at the event. But I mean, take who you want. You know what I mean? It's the people who try to play these little cancel games, these blacklist sort of amateur dramatics. They're the ones who are trying to wrangle and lasso a movement in under a certain form of political control, and it just has to be resisted at all levels. You don't have to associate with everyone out there, but the attitude should be, I'll only not associate with you. I'll really associate with you under any circumstances, but like, unless you're a total criminal or whatever, I'll chat to you. And that's under political tyranny. Basically, that attitude has to exist, a certain amount of solidarity, and that's important. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have gone off on that, but I just thought it was important to mention. So anyway, yeah, I think I'll leave it there. It's been a long stream, hasn't it? Maybe I'll read the super chats. Not just maybe, I'll definitely read those if I can find them. Here, lads. That's not right at all now. So I'm just actually looking for the tab to be able to read them. Super chats. Oh, here, it's asking me to send one to myself. If I could show you here, it's just like, I mean, I have to read them and I want to. Oh, there we go. I got it. Sorry. My bad. That was my fault. So, Emmanuel Godson gave €20. Thanks very much. Says, Garrod, keep it lit. I will do. Thanks very much. It only gives $5 and says, deep-rooted ancestry holds within the confines. Or sorry, I can't read anymore. I've been here too long. Deep-rooted ancestry rooted within the confines of a given land. The only true authentic citizenship that lends itself to social cohesion. End of. Yeah, that's true. I agree. Annie W gives €15 and says GRMMA, Gurav Mila Mila Margaret, I assume. Thank you very much. Michael Rock gives €4. No message. Thanks very much. Armchair Limerick Nationalist gives €5 and says, sound for the Ramble Garrod. Thank you. I love streaming, to be honest. I just love doing this. And Finola America gives €5 and says, Era, we love you. True that. Okay, thank you very much for all your super chats. I appreciate it. So yeah, look, I'll leave it there. Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'll be back soon, hopefully. I need to get thumbnails and all this kind of stuff sorted out. I meant to actually ask you about that earlier, what I should do. Try and make streaming a bit easier, have the same thumbnail every time. So I could just go live. that's a story for another day. Okay, listen, thanks for joining me for the ramble. I hope I didn't keep you too long, and good night. Slán, Ihuwa.